Chapter 995. Yi Guchen had seen Leng Qianhen back in the infinite wasteland plains. Therefore, it was impossible for him to be mistaken. Just as Yi Guchen saw Leng Qianhen's closed eyes suddenly opened. A pair of cold eyes, as cold as the stars in the sky, stared indifferently at Yi Guchen. In an instant, Yi Guchen felt as if he had fallen into an ice cave. At the same time, a frosty hurricane seemed to have been set off in the surrounding heaven and earth, pressing down on Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's body shook, feeling a terrifying pressure coming toward him. Coupled with the pressure of the sword qi that existed in the sword tomb itself, even Yi Guchen felt like he was about to suffocate. Yi Guchen hurriedly brought out his sword Dao and the unity of man and sword to resist the pressure. Huh! Leng Qianhen looked slightly surprised. Obviously, he did not expect Yi Guchen to have such a trick up his sleeve. He first glanced at Yi Guchen and then said, "Are very brave." The meaning of his words was obviously that Yi Guchen knew that this was his place of seclusion, but still barged in. Junior came here abruptly and offended Senior. Yi Guchen cupped his fists slightly. No matter what, he had to ask Leng Qianhen for a favor, so he had to be polite. Knowing that this is my place of seclusion, you still chose to enter. You are indeed worthy of being Duguobai, the innate saint of the Sword Dynasty, who recently passed through the 20th floor of Mount St. Crossing, Leng Qianhen said indifferently. Yi Guchen was not surprised that Leng Qianhen saw through his identity at a glance. Senior Leng has good eyesight. Yi Guchen smiled faintly. But, if you think that I'll let you off because of this, then you're gravely mistaken. Anyone who dares to disturb my cultivation can only— The solitary frost sword in Leng Qianhen's bosom trembled slightly, and a strand of sword qi shot towards Yi Guchen. Although it was only a wisp of sword qi, it was still an attack from a false saint. This move was enough to severely injure Yi Guchen. In the face of this oncoming sword intent, Yi Guchen remained completely unfazed. As expected of a divine weapon forged by a blacksmith, it is indeed sharp. The moment Yi Guchen finished speaking, the wisp of sword energy froze an inch in front of Yi Guchen before dissipating. Who are you? Leng Qianhen stared at Yi Guchen with sharp eyes. Senior Leng, you've indeed guessed my identity correctly. Unfortunately, you only know one aspect of it and not the other. Yi Guchen slowly raised his hand, revealing his face under the hood. Leng Qianhen was slightly puzzled. This face was indeed handsome, but there was nothing unusual about it. Yi Guchen smiled faintly, raised his hand, and rubbed his face slightly. The skin on his face peeled off, revealing Yi Guchen's original handsome features. You are, even with Leng Qianhen's character, his body trembled slightly. His gaze was as sharp as a sword as he stared fixedly at Yi Guchen's face. After Yi Guchen came to the Sword Dynasty, he had been wearing a face-changing mask on his face. At this moment, he took it off for the first time. How could you be? Yi Guchen? Leng Qianhen's eyes were filled with extreme confusion. In the infinite wasteland plains, Yi Guchen had escaped with the help of Su Qingyu. However, he had consumed the 9 deaths without regrets pill, which could be said to be certain death. However, now Yi Guchen, who everyone thought had already fallen, appeared in front of Leng Qianhen. It was no wonder that Leng Qianhen was so surprised. I won't elaborate on the various twists and turns. Senior Leng, you just need to know that I'm still alive. Yi Guchen said lightly. Good method. Everyone was deceived by you alone. Even the Starry Sword Pavilion and the Heavenly God Sword sect were deceived by you. Leng Qianhen clicked his tongue and sighed. But in the next moment, his expression suddenly changed, and his eyes flashed like cold stars. However, you actually have the guts to reveal your identity to me. Aren't you afraid that I will announce it, or— Leng Qianhen paused, and a faint killing intent spread out. Kill, and steal the sword. The entire Nantian region knew that Yi Guchen had the immemorial demon sword, God Devourer. That was a real immemorial famed sword. Even if it was only a Earth-ranking famed sword, it was enough to make people go crazy. Today, there were still many experts and overlord-level forces in the Nantian region who were looking for Yi Guchen's traces in order to obtain the God Devourer sword. Leng Qianhen's unsociable personality was long known, and he was also a sword cultivator. Even he was a little surprised that Yi Guchen had the courage to reveal his identity. If Senior is willing, you can do so. However, I'm sure that you won't do so. Yi Guchen smiled lightly. Leng Qianhen looked at Yi Guchen. Because of Senior's personality, I can empathize with you, Yi Guchen said. As a sword demon in his previous life, he was also a lonely person who lived alone for the sword Dao in his heart. A ferocious beast lives alone in the world. He has the pride of a swordsman. This kind of person would not do anything that would humiliate his pride. That would also destroy his state of mind. Furthermore, Senior was able to repay Senior Tianfeng's kindness back in the Tianhuang Plains. Even when faced with the threat of an overlord-level force, Senior Tianfeng remained unmoved. With such a character, you wouldn't do anything despicable. Yi Guchen spoke slowly, word by word, resolute and decisive. Leng Qianhen's expression froze, then he suddenly laughed towards the sky. His gray hair fluttered in the cold wind, and his hearty laughter shook the surroundings. Indeed, Leng Qianhen's heart was filled with the pride and arrogance of a swordsman. He was more like a solitary swordsman who only pursued the supreme sword Dao. How could such a person betray his own sword heart? If Leng Qianhen really killed someone and stole his sword Dao heart would also be shattered. Yi Guchen understood this feeling. This was also the appreciation between peerless swordsmen. Therefore, Yi Guchen took a gamble and took the initiative to reveal his identity. Interesting, Yi Guchen, I really see you in a new light. But since you came here and took the initiative to reveal your identity, I'm afraid you have something to say. Leng Qianhen took a deep look at Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen was sure that with his character, he would not kill someone and steal their sword. But for no reason, Yi Guchen would not take the risk to reveal his identity. Therefore, Leng Qianhen knew that Yi Guchen must have a purpose for coming here. Yi Guchen did not avoid it, but smiled and said, "To be honest, this time I came here because I have something to ask of you." Then, Yi Guchen told him some of his situation. For example, the hidden dangers of the fake saint family and so on. Of course, Yi Guchen did not say anything about the Saint Path Law enlightenment. After listening, Leng Qianhen shook his head slightly. You don't have to say any more. First, I will not get involved in the internal disputes of the Sword Dynasty. Second, I have no obligation to provide you with protection. I do owe Mo Tianfeng a favor, but you are at most half his disciple, not him. Moreover, I have already made a move on the Tianhuang Plains, which can be considered as repaying Mo Tianfeng's favor. With Leng Qianhen's character, he would not kill someone and steal their treasure. But he was definitely not a warm-hearted kind person. Yi Guchen also knew, so he did not intend to use Mo Tianfeng's favor as a condition. When I stepped into this place, I noticed that Senior Leng's cultivation is even higher than before. I'm afraid you are not far from the realm of tribulation saints, Yi Guchen said with a smile. Leng Qianhen stared indifferently, wanting to know what Yi Guchen was going to say next. What if I say that I have a way to help Senior Leng break through to the realm of tribulation saints? Boom. Just as Yi Guchen's voice fell, Leng Qianhen's aura suddenly erupted. Wind and snow filled the sky, surrounding the wilderness. You say it again. Chapter 996. Leng Qianhen's eyes were as sharp as swords as he stared straight at Yi Guchen. For any false saint expert, becoming a saint was always the most important thing. Only by transcending mortality and becoming a saint could one completely stand at the top of all living beings and martial arts. Leng Qianhen was no exception. People with his character were even more obsessed with becoming a saint. And now, Yi Guchen actually said that there was a way to help him break through to the heavenly tribulation saint realm. If it were anyone else, Leng Qianhen would have taken it as a joke. But Yi Guchen was different. His previous performance on the Endless Plains had made Leng Qianhen somewhat admire him. Therefore, he was willing to talk so much with Yi Guchen. Senior, you may think that my words are just a joke, Yi Guchen said. Indeed, if it were anyone else, I would have kicked him out long ago. Leng Qianhen calmed down. He wanted to hear what Yi Guchen could come up with. I'm sure you've heard about the legacy of the Tianxing dynasty in the ancient ruins, Yi Guchen said. You mean? Leng Qianhen frowned slightly. That's right. Rumor has it that there may be a fruit of law left behind by a saint in the legacy, which is the Saint Tao fruit. Senior, you have a deep understanding of the laws now. With the help of the Saint Tao fruit, you may be able to break through to become a heavenly tribulation saint, Yiguchen said. Leng Qianhen fell into deep thought. His current understanding of the laws was indeed very deep. However, he was still not very confident that he could survive the heavenly tribulation. But if he could obtain the Saint Tao fruit and completely comprehend the power of the laws, his chances of surviving the heavenly tribulation would be much higher. However, all of this was based on the premise that Yiguchen could obtain the Saint Tao fruit. What you said is indeed correct. However, firstly, is there really a Saint Tao fruit within the inheritance? Secondly, even if there is a Saint Tao fruit, it is not something you can obtain. Leng Qianhen shook his head slightly. Now, the map of the Void Sky Sacred Dynasty was in the hands of the 4 dynasties. As a rogue cultivator, Leng Qianhen would not be able to enter the treasure even if it appeared in the future because he would be blocked by the false saint experts of the other dynasties. Therefore, this is only a suggestion. In fact, there might only be a sliver of a chance. But senior, will you turn a blind eye to it? Yiguchen continued. The goal of all false saints was to become a saint. Even if there was only a sliver of a chance, or even a 1 in a million chance, no one was willing to let it go. Leng Qianhen gave Yiguchen a deep look. It had to be said that what Yiguchen said made sense. Logic told Leng Qianhen that it was impossible for Yiguchen to obtain the Sage Tao fruit. But what if? It was better to be safe than sorry. If Yiguchen really obtained the Sage Tao fruit, wouldn't Leng Qianhen miss an opportunity to become a saint? Everything depends on Senior. In fact, I don't want Senior to be my bodyguard. I just hope that Senior can lend a helping hand when I need Senior's help. Yiguchen's tone was neither servile nor overbearing. Leng Qianhen's eyes flashed with a dark light before he finally sighed. Yiguchen, you've convinced me. In the future, regardless of whether you can obtain the Sage Tao fruit or not, I will help you once. This is for the sake of Liang Tianfeng. And if you can really obtain the Sage Tao fruit. Leng Qianhen wanted to continue. However, after thinking about it, it seemed that it was really impossible, so he stopped talking. Then, Leng Qianhen threw a jade slip to Yiguchen. When you need it, just send a message through the jade slip. Leng Qianhen said and waved his hand. Yiguchen nodded slightly and put the jade slip away in his origin ring. He knew that Leng Qianhen treated him like this only because of Liang Tianfeng. As for the Sage Tao fruit, Leng Qianhen didn't have any hope at all. Yiguchen didn't say much. In fact, he wasn't sure whether he could obtain the Sage Tao fruit. Thank you, Senior Leng. After the matter was settled, Yiguchen also left Leng Qianhen's place of seclusion and prepared to go deeper into the sword tomb. Leng Qianhen's eyes flashed as he watched Yiguchen's departing figure. Back in the heavenly wasteland plains, I didn't play much of a role, so this time, I'll completely repay Liang Tianfeng's favor, Leng Qianhen muttered to himself. He also didn't think that Yiguchen would find the Sage Tao fruit to help him break through to the Saint Realm. At the edge of the sword tomb, everyone was stunned and their faces froze. What's going on? The cloaked man didn't seem to have been expelled by the solitary cloud sword saint? Not only was he not expelled, but he seems to be going deeper? What's going on? Did the sun rise from the west? All the warriors looked at each other and couldn't figure it out. Why would the aloof and arrogant Leng Qianhen allow a stranger to step into his place of seclusion and not attack him? What's going on? Who is that person? Inju clenched his fists and couldn't figure it out. How can this be? Does the cloaked man know that the solitary cloud sword saint won't attack him? On the other side, Suki Miyazaki's face was still filled with shock. That's great. Zimo, who had received the news, was very happy for Yiguchen. As for Qin Lang, he completely dispelled all his thoughts. Only God knew where the cloaked man came from. In the depths of the sword tomb, Yiguchen didn't know that there was already an uproar outside the sword tomb. He was still burying his head and continuing to move forward. The deepest part of 90,000 feet is just ahead. Yiguchen looked into the distance. The deepest part of the sword tomb was 100,000 feet in front of him. It was a storm of sword auras. The intensity of the storm was far greater than the tide of sword auras from before. Let's give it a try. Yi Guchen released his sword principle and became one with the sword. He directly charged into the storm of sword auras and wanted to go deeper. However, with a puff, Yi Guchen's body was sent flying and he spat out vermilion blood. This time, he suffered quite a bit of injury. Fortunately, Yi Guchen had the perfect body and the body of an ancient god. His recovery ability was amazing, and this injury didn't affect him too much. However, it was difficult to break through the barrier of the storm of sword auras. Yi Guchen frowned and pondered. At the same time, outside the sword tomb, many warriors and sword cultivators heaved a sigh of relief. That scared me to death. I thought that the cloaked man could enter 100,000 feet. He has now left Jian Jinghong behind. If he can really enter 100,000 feet, his sword principle talent is probably not inferior to Duguwubai, who passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. Hey, do you think that the cloaked man could be Duguwubai? How is that possible? Duguwubai has the Azura sword principle, and the cloaked man seems to have used the 5-element sword principle and another kind of sword principle. Don't tell me that Duguwubai has 3 kinds of sword principles? Indeed, I didn't think of that. The warrior who made the guess scratched his head embarrassedly. With 3 kinds of sword principles, even in the Sword Dynasty, where sword cultivators gathered, it was almost impossible to find such a person. Therefore, they directly dismissed this guess. In the sword tomb, Inju, Suki Miyazaki, and the others secretly heaved a sigh of relief. At the moment when everyone thought that the mysterious cloaked man would stop at a distance of 30,000 meters, the cloaked man suddenly stopped. Yi Guchen in the sword tomb sat cross-legged at the edge of the 100,000 feet. The surrounding sword-based Taoist rhymes were unusually thick, and it also caused Yi Guchen's understanding of sword principle to increase rapidly. Vaguely, an extremely faint wisp of sword essence spread out. This wisp of sword essence was very ethereal. However, it was fundamentally different from all the sword essences and sword principles that Yi Guchen had comprehended before. Even Leng Qianhen felt something and looked in Yi Guchen's direction. At a certain moment, Yi Guchen suddenly opened his eyes. His entire person seemed to have become one with the surrounding sword qi of the sword tomb. He directly walked step by step into the storm of sword qi. Chapter 997. That faint wisp of sword intent was none other than the creation-level sword Tao of all creation. Within the range of 90,000 feet, Yi Guchen made use of the comprehension of the sword-based Taoist rhyme and finally comprehended a trace of sword essence of all creation. What was the sword Tao of all creation? Heaven, earth, firmament, stars, and all other things could be used as swords. Yi Guchen used this wisp of sword Tao of all creation as a guide to completely integrate himself into the sword catacomb. Because of this, he was able to stroll into the storm of sword qi like this. In the end, Yi Guchen's figure completely stepped into the sword catacomb. Dead silence. There was dead silence outside the sword catacomb. The sword cultivators all widened their eyes and breathed heavily as if they had seen the most unbelievable scene. Someone had entered the sword catacomb. It was not that no one had entered the sword catacomb before. However, those people were mostly the older generation of sword cultivators. Among the younger generation, only Jian Jinghong had set a record of 80,000 feet. Now, there was a younger generation that had entered the sword catacomb. This was definitely another record that would shake the sword dynasty. Oh my god, first Duguwubai passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing, and now a mysterious genius has entered the sword catacomb. Since when did the sword dynasty have so many peerless geniuses? Yeah, who is this person? He can't be Duguwubai. Some people said confidently. Yi Guchen had already passed the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. If this person was Yi Guchen, how could the other geniuses live? Unfortunately, that was the truth. However, no one knew who it was yet. Inju, Lin, Su, and Suki Miyazaki were already shocked speechless. Even Zimo and the other disciples of the Divine Cliff team, who were standing on Yi Guchen's side, were a little stunned. Qin Lang, on the other hand, trembled all over. He had already made up his mind that when Yi Guchen came out, he would sincerely apologize and beg for Yi Guchen's forgiveness. While everyone was still in shock, Yi Guchen had already stepped into the 100,000-foot range. He had arrived at the true core of the sword tomb. There were countless ancient swords densely packed together in the surroundings. At the center of the swords was an ancient stone platform. That should be the place with the densest Taoist rhyme in the sword tomb. Yi Guchen's eyes lit up. He was indeed ambitious when he came to the sword tomb. Not only did he want to successfully comprehend the lightning sword Dao, but he also wanted to obtain the lightning sword Dao. More importantly, he wanted to comprehend the sword intent of all creation. Only the core area in the deepest depths of the sword tomb could satisfy his needs. Yi Guchen walked towards the stone platform. Along the way, he saw that there were many sword marks on the ground. These stones had been soaked and baptized by the sword-based Taoist rhyme and sword qi all year round, forming natural sword marks on the surface. It was also very helpful for comprehending the sword Dao. There were such sword rhyme stones in the Sword Soul Cave of Sacred Cliff College. However, those sword rhyme stones were far inferior to the ones in the deepest part of the sword tomb. Yi Guchen did not stand on ceremony and put the sword rhyme stones into his origin ring. Then, Yi Guchen went forward and sat cross-legged on the stone platform. In an instant, the countless ancient swords in the sword tomb vibrated at the same time. Sword qi surged and rushed into the stars. This abnormality also spread throughout the surroundings of the sword tomb. Even the warriors in Sword Leaning City could feel it. What's going on? It's coming from the sword tomb. Sword qi rushing into the stars. Did someone enter the 100,000-foot range of the sword tomb again? Could it be a sword Dao false saint expert? Or the solitary cloud sword saint? The strange phenomenon in the sword tomb caused a huge commotion in Sword Leaning City. Many warriors and sword cultivators rushed out of Sword Leaning City like locusts and arrived at the sword tomb. When they found out that the person who had entered the 100,000-foot range of the sword tomb was a young genius, everyone's expression froze in shock. Could it be another dark horse like Duguwubai? This person has two peerless sword das. He's indeed extraordinary. Many sword cultivators looked toward the depths of the sword tomb. Unfortunately, the 100,000-foot range of the sword tomb was covered by the sword qi storm and could not be seen. In the deepest part of the sword tomb, Yi Guchen sat cross-legged on the stone platform and began to comprehend. The moment he sat cross-legged on the stone platform, he resonated with the ancient swords in the sword tomb. What a dense Taoist rhyme! Yi Guchen was shocked. The sword-based Taoist rhyme was far superior to the 90,000-foot range from before, let alone the previous areas. Yi Guchen finally understood why everyone wanted to enter the deepest part of the sword tomb. At this moment, Yi Guchen understood something even without the help of the enlightened sword heart and the enlightened ancient tree. All kinds of sword techniques and martial arts were integrated in his heart. I'll comprehend the lightning sword Dao first. Yi Guchen made a decision. He used the enlightened sword heart, the enlightened ancient tree's help, the sword tomb's support, and the sword demon's comprehension ability. With all these factors added together, Yi Guchen's comprehension ability was off the charts and reached the peak. Although it was difficult to break through the bottleneck of the peerless sword Dao, it could not withstand Yi Guchen's terrifying comprehension ability. After a short 3 days, the surface of Yi Guchen's body was surrounded by the light of 9-colored profound lightning. The surrounding void was filled with the sound of thunder exploding. At a certain moment, Yi Guchen suddenly opened his eyes. His eyes were filled with lightning, as if they were two pools of lightning. He raised his hand and a terrifying sword qi spread out. It turned into endless lightning and gathered in the sky. Finally, it turned into a dazzling ball of lightning. The ball of lightning released an endless amount of lightning, turning the entire sword tomb into a wild lightning forbidden land. Yi Guchen was like the god of thunder descending to the world. He was extremely powerful. This was the sword domain of the lightning sword Dao. Heaven's punishment thunder prison. Yi Guchen finally understood why the lightning sword reverend sword was called the 9-dragon thunder prison. It was because the 9-dragon thunder prison was a perfect match for the sword domain of the lightning sword Dao. Yi Guchen was looking forward to seeing how powerful the two thunder prisons would be when they were stacked together. Thinking of this, Yi Guchen could not help but take out the 9-dragon thunder prison. However, to Yi Guchen's surprise, he found that the 9-dragon thunder prison had also undergone a transformation. The thunder flood dragon's soul gradually emitted a faint dragon's power. The thunder flood dragon had turned into a thunder dragon. Could it be because I absorbed the force of the tribulation at the 20th layer of Mount Saint Crossing, and now that I've fully comprehended the thunderous sword Tao, the 9-dragon thunder prison has completely evolved? Yi Guchen could only think of this reason after pondering for a while. It was conceivable that when the thunder flood dragon's soul became the thunder dragon's soul, the 9-dragon thunder prison would be the real 9-dragon thunder prison. Next, it's time to comprehend the sword essence of all creation. Yi Guchen withdrew the thunder prison and began to meditate on the sword essence of all creation. Due to the obstruction of the sword chi storm, the people outside could not see Yi Guchen's movements. However, this did not prevent more and more people from gathering here. As the days passed, more and more people gathered outside the sword tomb. If it were not for the 5 academies competition, perhaps more people would have come. Chapter 998. Time passed day by day, and the 5 academies competition was getting closer and closer. The entire sword dynasty was stirred up because of the 5 academies competition. While the matter of the 5 academies competition was fermenting, another matter began to spread out. A mysterious genius had stepped into the depths of the sword catacomb. The previous record was set by Jian Jinghong, who had the creation-level sword intent. Now another mysterious genius had appeared and broken Jian Jinghong's record, which could be said to have set off a storm. If not for the 5 academies competition, it would have attracted the attention of most people. The matter of the sword tomb would definitely be spread throughout the sword dynasty, just like the matter of Mount Saint Crossing. Tiandu Ridge Hua family. Hua Wuxiu sat alone in a pavilion with a chessboard in front of him. He held a white piece in one hand and a black piece in the other. He was playing chess with himself. Who is it that stepped into the sword catacomb? Hua Wuxiu's eyes dimmed as he mumbled to himself. He had also thought that it was Duguobai. However, according to the rumors, the mysterious genius did not use the Azura sword principle, but the 5 elements sword principle and another peerless level of sword principle. If it was said that Duguobai had 3 peerless sword principles, even Hua Wuxiu would not believe it. In a secret place of cultivation in the sword dynasty, a bare-chested young man sat cross-legged in the endless sword chi, receiving the baptism. The young man's black hair fluttered in the wind, his eyebrows were sword-like, and his handsome face was sharp. There was a sword mark between his eyebrows, which emitted a transcendent wave of sword principle. What was strange was that although there was endless sword chi around him, it could not hurt the young man. Instead, it surrounded him as if the young man was born to be the master of the sword. To be able to break the record I set in the sword tomb, interesting. I really want to fight with this person. The young man's lips curled up into a smile, and his eyes surged with battle intent. He was the legendary second on the sword ranking, the peerless genius who had the embryonic form of the heavenly sword principle, Jian Jinghong. At this moment, in the sword tomb of the heavenly sword mountain, there were already many figures densely surrounding the sword tomb. Although there were fewer people coming to the sword tomb to watch the fun because of the 5 academies competition, there was still a dense crowd of people as far as the eye could see. That mysterious genius has been cultivating in this place for so long? Yeah, I'm really curious. Who is he? Many sword cultivators were whispering to each other. Qin Lang, Zimo, and other Sacred Cliff College students were among the crowd. After a period of cultivation, they also walked out of the sword tomb. That young master is really too amazing. I really want to know his true identity. Zimo's eyes were faintly twinkling with stars. Extraordinary talent and strength, a mysterious identity, and a hero saving the damsel in distress. It could be said that Yi Guchen had fulfilled all of the little girl's fantasies. Qin Lang's face was slightly stiff, but he did not dare to have a trace of hostility toward Yi Guchen. In addition, Yin Ju and the others from the Yin family also came out. Ju's face was as calm as water, without a trace of expression. Lin and Su were no longer as arrogant as before. Instead, their faces were slightly pale, and they faintly felt fear. Suki Miyazaki from Tianxian College also came out of the sword tomb. "Who are you?" Suki Miyazaki looked into the depths of the sword tomb. She did not leave, but chose to wait here. Just outside the sword tomb, while everyone was waiting, Yiguchen, who was in the deepest part of the sword tomb, was still concentrating on comprehending the sword principle. The 3 levels of sword principle were ordinary, peerless, and creation. The higher the level, the stronger the power. Of course, the difficulty of comprehending it was also multiplied. Otherwise, people who had comprehended the sword principle of the creation level would not be so rare. During this period of comprehension, Yiguchen finally completely pried open the key of the sword principle of all creation. At a certain moment, Yiguchen slowly opened his eyes, and a special wave of sword principle spread out. As the wave of sword principle spread out, there seemed to be countless sword chi gathering in the void around him. All things in the world as swords, gods, ghosts, demons, and evil as swords, the universe as swords, Yiguchen muttered to himself. He suddenly stood up and took a step forward. Wherever he passed, endless sword chi rose into the air. It was as if every blade of grass and every tree had turned into a sword. The true essence of the sword is not limited to the form. Mountains, rivers, grass, trees, the sun, the moon, and the stars can all be swords. At this moment, Yiguchen completely comprehended the sword principle of all creation. Yiguchen raised his hand. There was no sword in his hand, but in the surrounding void, endless sword chi burst out. It was as if it formed a torrent of sword chi that swept across the field. At this moment, Yiguchen's surroundings were filled with sword chi. Every blade of grass, tree, mountain, and stone had turned into sword chi, strangling the void, and the sound of swords could be heard in the sky. I have only just comprehended the sword principle of all creation, and it already has such power. If I completely comprehend it, how powerful will it be? What if it transforms into the sword principle? Feeling the terrifying power of the torrent of sword chi, Yiguchen could not help but exclaim. The power of the creation-level sword principle was indeed extraordinary. He was also very curious. After he transforms the sword principle of all creation into the sword principle, how powerful would the sword territory be? Next, Yiguchen used the advantage of the sword tomb to completely consolidate the sword principle of all creation. As for the transformation into the sword principle of all creation, it was not something that could be done in a few days. Just as Yiguchen was comprehending the sword principle of all creation. At Leng Qianhen's place of seclusion, Leng Qianhen, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes and looked at the place 10,000 feet away. That wave of sword principle, could it be? There was surprise in Leng Qianhen's eyes. In another place, Jian Shisan also vaguely felt the wave. His voice was hoarse, and he muttered to himself, "Another Jian Jinghong, I hope you won't be an obstacle." Under the ghost mask, Jian Shisan's dark and bottomless cold eyes had a deep meaning. However, those sword cultivators outside the sword tomb did not feel it. After completely comprehending the sword principle of all creation, Yiguchen did not choose to come out. After all, it was not easy for him to go deep into the sword tomb, and the effect was the best when he entered for the first time. It would be a pity if he left just like that. Next, Yiguchen sorted out his sword skills and martial arts. The 3 ultimate holy swords were completely mastered. The 3 moves could be combined at will, and Yiguchen had completely comprehended the combination of the 3 moves. It could be used as a killing move. There was also the 4th move of the 10,000 Gods Tribulation, Heaven's End. Yiguchen also began to comprehend it. Besides that, the most important thing was the ultimate sword domain. It was also the trump card that Yiguchen valued the most at the moment. However, as soon as he started cultivating, Yiguchen understood that the cultivation method of the ultimate sword domain was indeed extremely difficult. It seems that the ultimate sword domain should be a move unique to the sword tribe of Heaven Mountain. Yiguchen muttered to himself. As one of the 3 hidden forces in the South Horizon region, the Sword Tribe of Heaven Mountain was naturally very mysterious. It was understandable that they had such a cultivation method. Yiguchen still had not figured out his relationship with the Sword Tribe of Heaven Mountain. However, Yiguchen was determined to complete the cultivation of the ultimate sword domain. Now that he had the Azura, Edgeless, 5 Elements, and Thunderbolt sword principles, the 4 Supreme Sword principles, he just happened to meet the cultivation requirements of the ultimate sword domain. In the following time, Yiguchen continued to comprehend in his heart. The 5 Academies Grand Competition finally arrived under everyone's attention. Chapter 999. The 5 Academies Competition was a competition jointly organized by the 5 major academies, and it was also a rare grand event in the Sword Dynasty. Every time the 5 Academies competition, there would be many outstanding geniuses. Of course, there were also many geniuses who fell and lost their glory. For example, Ling Yamoshu, whose right arm was cut off by Hua Wuxiu and his spiritual resonance was broken, was a living example. The 5 Academies competition this time had a different meaning, because the timing of the competition was too sensitive. Now most people knew the situation in the Sword Dynasty. The aristocratic families and the individual cultivators were against each other. Tensei College, Sun Moon College, and Long River College were all controlled by the aristocratic families. Although Tianxian College was not weak, it could not compete with the 3 major academies. As for Sacred Cliff College, once the #1 academy in the Sword Dynasty, it was now in an awkward situation. Previously, Ling Yamoshu was crippled by Hua Wuxiu, which made Sacred Cliff College's reputation fall to the bottom. After the 5 Academies competition, it would be the battle for the Sword Master position. If Sacred Cliff College did not perform well in the 5 Academies competition, it would undoubtedly affect the battle for the Sword Master position. It would also shake the hearts of the individual cultivators' lords. Therefore, at this stage, the only way to make the individual cultivators' camp excited was to suppress Tensei College and other forces in the 5 Academies competition. In the past, this was almost unimaginable, and no one would have any hope. But this time was different, because there was Yiguchen, a natural-born saint. Everyone was curious about Yiguchen's real combat power. Could this natural-born saint help Sacred Cliff College win first place in the 5 Academies competition? It could be said that this suspense attracted all the sword cultivators in the Sword Dynasty. This time, the 5 Academies competition would be more grand than before. However, just as everyone was looking forward to Yiguchen's performance, there was a disturbance in Sacred Cliff College. Yiguchen left alone and did not disturb too many people. In addition to Ling Moin, only Bei Xian Elder, the 5 Temple Masters, Great Elder Imei, and a few others knew. Moreover, Yiguchen had gone to the Sword Catacomb to comprehend his own trump card. Therefore, Bei Xian Elder and the others did not spread the news. During this time, many Sacred Cliff College disciples were puzzled and found that Yiguchen was missing. Where did senior brother Dugu go? Why can't I see him anywhere? In this 5 Academies competition, we can only rely on senior brother Dugu. Where is he? Many disciples of the Divine Cliff Academy were anxious and wanted to find traces of Yiguchen, because the 5 Academies competition was getting closer and closer. Facing the emotions of many Sacred Cliff College's disciples, Bei Xian Elder and the others could only smile bitterly. They also knew that the mysterious genius who recently stepped into the Sword Tomb should be Yiguchen. But because of this, Bei Xian Elder and the others could not disclose in advance so that Hua Wuxiu and the others could be prepared. Therefore, there were a lot of rumors and slanders. Of course, everyone in Sacred Cliff College believed in Yiguchen. However, after the news spread, the aristocratic families took advantage of it. That Dugu Wubai disappeared. Could it be that he is afraid of Hua Wuxiu? I think so. What he said about cultivating in a mysterious place is nonsense. He must have a guilty conscience. Yes, if he cultivated for a year, Dugu Wubai might have the power to fight, but now, many rumors and slanders spread throughout the Sword Dynasty. Many aristocratic families were mocking Yiguchen, saying that he deliberately escaped because he was afraid. Dugubai, will you really escape? On the Hua family's side, Hua Wuxiu was thinking. To be honest, he did not believe that Yiguchen was the kind of person who was afraid of fighting. But the news could not be false. If that's the case, then you really don't deserve the title of born saint. Hua Wuxiu shook his head slightly. As time went by, Yiguchen's figure was still missing in Sacred Cliff College. Even some of the Divine Cliff Academy's disciples felt nervous. While they were waiting, the day of the 5 Academies competition was finally approaching. Outside the sword tomb of Heavenly Sword Mountain, many of the warriors who had gathered there had already dispersed. Because most of them were rushing to the location of the 5 Academies competition, the imperial capital of the Sword Dynasty, Sword Emperor Ridge. He hasn't come out yet? Suki Miyazaki frowned slightly. She still wanted to know the true identity of the mysterious genius. But now, someone in the college had sent a message that the 5 Academies competition was about to begin, so she could not continue to wait here. What a pity, I really want to know who you are. Suki Miyazaki shook her head slightly and left with a group of Tianxian College disciples to prepare for the 5 Academies competition. Yin Ju and others from the Yin family could only leave because of the 5 Academies competition. Even Jian Shursan left the sword tomb. Junior Sister Zimo, the 5 Academies competition is about to begin. We have to go back to the college, Qin Lang said. With their strength, although they could not get a high ranking in the 5 Academies competition, it was good for them to train themselves. No, I have to wait for young master to come out. Zimo shook her head. Qin Lang had no choice but to wait with Zimo. 3 days later, outside the cave of Sacred Cliff College, many ships were floating in the void. Many disciples of Sacred Cliff College were ready to go to Sword Emperor Ridge. But if one looked carefully, one could see that every single Divine Cliff Academy's disciple's face was filled with disappointment and nervousness. During this period of time, Yigu Chen's disappearance caused all the disciples to feel uneasy. They were more afraid that the 5 Academies competition would repeat the same mistake. Only Jiang Yen had a sneer on his face. Xuanlian, Kong Kong, Ling Moin, Han Lingxian, Yen Suk, and others were also ready to go. Where on earth did Brother Dugu go? Kong Kong asked, scratching his head in confusion. Young Master Dugu is not a person who runs away. Han Lingxian was very confident in Yiguchen. Kong Kong also nodded. He did not believe that Yiguchen would be afraid of Hua Wuxiu. But now the public opinion is very bad for Brother Dugu, Xuanlian said. Any public opinion will collapse by itself, Ling Moin said. Because she knew that Yiguchen was the mysterious genius who stepped into the sword tomb. After she said that, everyone looked at her strangely. Ling Moin really seemed to have changed her temperament. Only Han Lingxian, who had a pure heart, took a deep look at Ling Moin. She understood how Ling Moin felt. Although many of the Divine Cliff Academy's disciples were uneasy, Elder Bei Xian and the others were extremely calm and composed. They knew that Yiguchen would definitely not miss the 5 Academies competition. Little friend Dugu, I'm very curious. What kind of amazement will you bring to the world after coming out of the sword tomb? Bei Xian Elder said with a smile in his heart. Just as everyone was about to board the ship and set off, a black-clothed figure walked out of the Divine Cliff Academy with firm steps. When they saw this figure, all the noise in the surroundings quietened down. There was surprise, complexity, and sighing in their eyes. The person who appeared was Ling Emoshu. Chapter 1000. Ling Emoshu was once ranked 10th on the sword ranking list and a disciple of the Holy Emblem. He was once the pride of everyone in Sacred Cliff College. However, this pride was trampled on by Hua Wuxiu in the 5 Academies tournament. After that, Ling Emoshu was unable to recover from this setback, which became a permanent pain in Sacred Cliff College. Tensei College often used this to ridicule Sacred Cliff College. However, the disciples of Sacred Cliff College had never blamed Ling Emoshu. After all, he was also fighting for the honor of Sacred Cliff College. But now, why did Ling Emoshu come out? His divine palace had been destroyed, and his cultivation had been crippled. This was a well-known fact. Therefore, no one deliberately probed Ling Emoshu's aura. Even Bei Xian Elder and the others did not know that Ling Emoshu had risen again under Yi Guchen's guidance. I'm going to the 5 Academies tournament this time. Ling Emoshu's tone was firm. His eyes were deep and flashed with a sharp light. His aura was restrained and steady. If one did not deliberately probe, they would not know the situation at all. Emoshu. Bei Xian Elder hesitated slightly. At this time, Ling Moyin took a step forward and said, "Elders, let Big Brother go." Others did not know, but Ling Moyin knew. Her big brother was different from before. Of course, Ling Moyin was not sure whether Ling Emoshu had used the Nirvana pill to reconstruct his spiritual abode. But no matter what, she believed in her brother. In the sky, Confuzi, the dean of the Holy Cliff College, was also there. He looked deeply at Ling Emoshu and waved his hand. Let him go. Since even Confuzi had spoken, Bei Xian Elder and the others could only agree. The rest of the Sacred Cliff College disciples also looked at Ling Emoshu with complicated expressions. Ling Emoshu's expression remained the same as he stepped onto the ship. "Brother Dugu, I, Ling Emoshu, will not let you down," Ling Emoshu murmured in his heart. After that, the people of Sacred Cliff College also boarded the ships and headed towards the Sword Monarch Ridge. Practically at the same time, the ships of the other 4 academies flew towards the Sword Monarch Ridge in unison. The Sword Monarch Ridge was the core territory of the Sword Dynasty, and the headquarters of the Sword Alliance was located there. The 5 academies competition was held here, which would naturally have a far-reaching impact. During these few days, the entire Sword Dynasty was in a state of upheaval as countless people gathered towards the Sword Monarch Ridge. The Sword Monarch City was located at the core of the Sword Monarch Ridge, and it was also the core imperial city of the Sword Dynasty. As far as the eye could see, the Sword Monarch City was majestic and vast, and it was bustling with people. Even though the area of the entire Sword Sovereign City was already very large, the various cultivators that flocked over still filled the entire imperial city to the brim. The location of the 5 academies competition was at the Sword Battle Square in the center of the Sword Monarch City. At this moment, the Sword Battle Square was already filled with a sea of people, and it held a total of 500,000 sword cultivators. On the Sword Battle Square, the arenas had already been set up, and they were quietly waiting for the disciples of the 5 academies to compete. There were still a few days before the competition began, but there were already many discussions around the square. "Hey, do you guys think that Duguwubai will come? I think that should be a pretense. If Duguwubai really doesn't come, his reputation as a natural saint will dim." Many people were talking about Yi Guchen, and there were a few warriors who were insightful and thought that Yi Guchen would definitely come. That's not necessarily true. Talent and strength are not necessarily the same. If Duguwubai really loses to Hua Wuxiu, that would be a disgrace. There were also people who had different opinions. They thought that Duguwubai was still not a match for Hua Wuxiu, so he should avoid him for the time being. Just as everyone was talking about it, in the distant sky, many ships were sailing through the void towards them. The people from the 5 academies are finally here. The ships of the 5 academies arrived together. On the side of Tensei College, Hua Yuntao was still the leader. After all, in addition to his identity as a false saint of the Hua family, he was also the great elder of Tensei College. Beside him, Hua Wuxiu had one hand behind his back and the other hand was playing with a chess piece. He looked very leisurely and indifferent. Only the disciples of the 5 academies could participate in the 5 academies tournament. The first on the sword list, Zi, and the second on the sword list, Jian Jinghong, were not disciples of the academies. The 13 swordsmen could not participate in the 5 academies tournament either. Therefore, Hua Wuxiu, who was third on the sword list, was naturally the most promising person to win the 5 academies tournament. In the past, Hua Wuxiu had indeed won the 5 academies tournament. Therefore, Hua Wuxiu did not feel the slightest pressure in the 5 academies tournament. Of course, there was one more suspense in this 5 academies tournament, which was Yi Guchen, who had passed through the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing and won the title of Natural Saint. On the ship of Tensei College, there was a woman with a cold face. She was Yushuang Yan. She had also joined Tensei College. In addition, Hua Xingjie was also there. On the other side, the leader of Sun Moon College was Shangguan Bo, the head of the Shangguan family. He had also appeared on Mount St. Crossing last time. He had another identity, the dean of Sun Moon College. On the side of Sun Moon College, Jiang Fengmian, Shangguan Jingshan, and Shangguan Yan were there. On the side of Long River College, the leader was the first elder of the Yin family, Yin Lengshan, who was also the first elder of Long River College. Yin Ju, Yin Lin, and Yin Su, who had appeared in the Sword Tomb, were also there. In addition, Yin Wufeng, Ouyang Fengyun, and Ouyang Tianji were also there. On the side of Tianxian College, Wu Hongyan was naturally the leader. Mu Xingzu, Ying Lang, and Suki Miyazaki, who had hurried over from the Sword Tomb, were also there. Of course, Sacred Cliff College was the most eye-catching. After all, Sacred Cliff College had produced a natural saint this time. More than 500,000 warriors in the entire sword battle square focused their attention on the ship of Sacred Cliff College, hoping to find the figure that had attracted everyone's attention. But there was no one. On the side of Sacred Cliff College, Confuzi was the leader. Among those disciples, Xuanlian, who ranked 4th on the sword ranking, Kong Kong, Han Lingxian, Ling Moin, and Ling Yimoshu were all there. Only Yiguchen was missing. That Duguwubai really didn't come. It seems that Duguwubai is really afraid of the battle. I thought it was just some rumor spread by the aristocratic families. When they saw that Yiguchen's figure did not appear on the ship of Sacred Cliff College, the entire sword battle square was in an uproar. This was because many of the warriors who came to watch the battle were from the lone cultivator camp. Naturally, they would choose to support Yiguchen. However, Yiguchen really did not appear, which surprised and disappointed the lone cultivator warriors. Why is this happening? Duguwubai is a natural saint who passed the 20th level of Mount St. Crossing. Yes, even if he might lose, he can't not show up. Many of the lone cultivator warriors were extremely disappointed. They had great expectations for Yiguchen. They had hoped that Yiguchen could contend with Hua Wuxiu and increase the power of the lone cultivator camp. However, it was all in vain now. Chapter 1001. Duguwubai really didn't come? On the ship of Tensei College, Hua Wuxiu shook his head slightly and sighed. Looking at his appearance, there was actually a bit of pity. Duguwubai must have a guilty conscience. How can he be compared with you, Brother Hua? Yushuangyan said. Facing Hua Wuxiu, the indifference on her face disappeared and was replaced by worship and admiration. Yes, that Duguwubai is just a pewter spearhead. Hua Xingjie also snorted coldly. However, he subconsciously neglected the fact that he had once suffered a crushing defeat at the hands of such a pewter spearhead. That little bastard has a good idea. In this way, you can't cripple him. Hua Yuntao lowered his voice and seemed a little angry and disappointed. He also wanted Hua Wuxiu to completely cripple Yiguchen in the 5 academies competition. Now that Yiguchen avoided the battle, they had no choice. I always feel that this Duguwubai is not a person who avoids the battle. He will definitely come. Hua Wuxiu's eyes flashed a dark light and he thought. On the side of Sun Moon College, Shangguan Jingshan sneered and said, Didn't Duguwubai say that he would eliminate me? Why is he not here now? Don't tell me you're really scared? Shangguan Yan's pretty eyes rolled around. She also did not believe that Yiguchen would avoid the battle. Duguwubai should not be that kind of character. He will definitely come. Jiang Fengmian judged. On the side of Long River College, Ouyang Fengyun faintly shook his head and said, It seems that there is no chance to fight with him. Before, in the ancient Chaos Wasteland, there was no winner between us. Duguwubai is very arrogant, but I'm afraid that he is not your opponent. Ouyang Tianji sneered. He hated Yiguchen to the core. He was happy to see Yiguchen's reputation ruined. On the side of Tianxian College, Mu Xingzu had absolute confidence in Yiguchen. Suki Miyazaki was slightly dazed and was still thinking about who the mysterious genius in the Sword Tomb was. At present, the 5 academies had all arrived, and the atmosphere instantly reached its peak. Confuzi, it seems that our Tensei College will take first place in the 5 academies competition this time. Hua Yuntao said with a fake smile. Oh, you are so confident? Kenfuzi stroked his snow-white beard and looked very calm. Are you still counting on Duguwubai? But where is he now? Hua Yuntao gave tit for tat. You don't have to worry about this. Kenfuzi said lightly. Feeling the strong smell of gunpowder between the words, the entire sword battle square was in an uproar. There were still a few days before the 5 academies competition officially began. These few days were the time to sign up for the competition. After all, not all the disciples of the academies would participate. Some people just came to watch the battle. After the registration was over, those who did not sign up would not be able to participate in the 5 academies competition. Of course, there was a condition that could allow the disciples who did not sign up to participate in the competition. However, no one used that condition at all. Hey, look, that's Ling Emoshu. Did he sign up too? Some warriors noticed Ling Emoshu. Seen your brother Ling? Even some of the disciples of Sacred Cliff College were a little stunned. They thought that Ling Emoshu was just here to watch the battle. Who would have thought that he would sign up for the competition? Kenfuzi looked deeply at Ling Emoshu and revealed a trace of satisfaction in his eyes. Oh, is he asking to be humiliated? When they saw Ling Emoshu sign up, almost all the disciples of Tensei College showed a look of disdain. Hua Wuxiu did not care at all. In his eyes, Ling Emoshu did not exist at all. In his opinion, there was no need to worry about a loser. Time passed day by day, and the registration date was also over. In the end, the crowd did not see Yiguchin. The registration time is over. There is no hope at all. Even if Duguwubai comes now, he can't participate in the 5 academies competition. Many people sighed. Most of them were warriors from the Free Cultivator camp. As for the warriors from the 5 fake saint families, they were all mocking and ridiculing. Even on the Divine Cliff Academy's side, many disciples were somewhat dejected and dispirited. Is there no other way? Ling Moyin bit her lip. She did not think that Yiguchin would avoid the battle. It was very likely that he was concentrating on cultivation and forgot about the time. No, there is another way, Xuanlian said. You mean? Ling Moyin seemed to have thought of something and her delicate body trembled. However, she immediately shook her head and said, That's impossible. That condition is too difficult. Oh, how do you know that Brother Dugu won't do that? He just likes to surprise people. Xuanlian smiled faintly. Ling Moyin was slightly stunned. That condition had never appeared in the 5 academies competition in the past. Because no one would choose to participate in the 5 academies competition in that way. That was looking for trouble. As time passed, the 5 academies competition officially began after the registration was completed. At the beginning of the 5 academies competition, 2 flying boats appeared in the sky. Many geniuses with extraordinary auras were standing on the boats. They wore masks on their faces and had extraordinary auras. The Sword Sons are here. Some people shouted. In fact, no one was surprised by the arrival of these Sword Sons. After all, those who stood out in the 5 academies competition had the strength to compete for the position of Sword Son. It was normal for these Sword Sons to come in advance to check out the situation. Standing on these 2 flying boats were the Sword Sons from the Free Cultivator camp and the Aristocratic Family camp. On one of the flying boats, Kenpo was among them. In addition, Jian Wu, 7th Swordsman, and Jian Shi, who had appeared before, were also there. In addition, there were 2 more people. One was 10th Swordsman, who was also a Sword Son from the Free Cultivator camp. The other person was dressed in a gray robe with a blood-red long sword on his back and a ghost mask on his face. It was Jian Shisan, who had a brief fight with Yiguchin in the Sword Tomb. He was also the strongest Sword Son from the Free Cultivator camp. Little 13, I heard that there's a mysterious prodigy in the Sword Catacomb who has stepped into the Sword Catacomb? Sword 11 asked. Yes. Jian Shisan indifferently responded and did not say much. Jian Shi and others seemed to be used to Jian Shisan's alienation and indifference, so they did not mind. On the contrary, Jian Wu shook his head and said, Duguwubai did not come to participate in the competition. It seems that the champion of the 5 academies competition will be Hua Wuxiu. In fact, the Sword Sons from the Free Cultivator camp did not want Hua Wuxiu to win the championship. Jian Shisan's eyes under the ghost mask flickered secretly. Only he had a faint suspicion that the mysterious genius in the sword tomb was probably Yi Guqin. But he did not say it out loud. On the other side, the Sword Sons from the aristocratic family camp were also discussing. It seems that the champion this time is undoubtedly Hua Wuxiu. A Sword Son in a blue shirt smiled faintly. He was Sword too. Among the Sword Sons from the aristocratic family camp, his strength was second only to Jiankui. But this time, Jiankui did not come. It seems that the battle for the position of Sword Son this time will be a battle between the aristocratic families. Sword 3 laughed. He was a young man with an iron mask with a strong back and a strong waist. In short, whether it was these Sword Sons or the more than 500,000 warriors present, they all thought that the champion of the 5 academies competition was almost decided. And it was also at this moment that there was finally a trace of movement in the sword tomb that had been silent for a long time. Chapter 1002. Sky Sword Ridge, Sword Tomb. Outside the sword tomb, there were still some sword cultivators gathered, but there were much fewer of them than before. This was because most of them had gone to the Sword Monarch City in the Sword Monarch Ridge to observe the 5 academies tournament. Qin Lang and Zimo were still waiting at the edge of the sword tomb. He can actually cultivate in the sword tomb for so long. Qin Lang's eyes were still filled with shock. Even if an ordinary person could withstand the pressure of the sword tomb, they could not cultivate in the sword tomb for a long time. Therefore, after cultivating for a period of time, they would need to come out and enter again. However, Yi Guqin had been in the sword tomb for so many days, but he had yet to come out. What was even more shocking was that Yi Guqin was cultivating in the sword tomb, which was also the place where the pressure of the sword chi was the strongest. To be able to stay in such a place for such a long time was absolutely shocking. That young master is really extraordinary. I really want to know who he is. Zimo's eyes were filled with curiosity and yearning. While everyone was waiting patiently, the storm of sword chi that swept through the heavens and the earth in the sword tomb suddenly became chaotic. The entire sword tomb began to tremble. What's going on? The sword cultivators who were still cultivating in the sword tomb were all startled like birds startled by the twang of a bow. What's going on? Zimo, Qin Lang, and the others also noticed it. The entire sword tomb seemed to be trembling slightly, as if a great calamity was about to appear. Look, those swords! Suddenly, someone's eyes widened as he shouted in shock. Zimo and the others looked over and saw that the ancient swords in the sword tomb had begun to tremble slightly. At first, only a few of them were trembling, but then, as if they were attracted by an infection, there was a chain reaction. Countless ancient swords began to buzz and tremble. The center of the fluctuation is coming from the depths of the sword tomb. Some sword cultivators sensed it, and their eyes were filled with disbelief as they stared at the depths of the sword tomb. This strange phenomenon had never happened in the sword tomb before. It's that young master? Zimo's eyes were filled with surprise as she stared at the sword tomb. Inside the sword tomb, even Leng Qianhen could feel the changes in the sword tomb. His gaze unconsciously turned to the core of the sword tomb. Is this really something he can do? Even a false saint like Leng Qianhen had a hint of surprise in his eyes. He had been cultivating in the sword tomb for so long, but this was the first time he had seen such an abnormality. At this moment, in the depths of the sword vault, around Yi Guqin, countless ancient swords vibrated violently, as if resonating with Yi Guqin. Every ancient sword drew closer to Yi Guqin. It was as if Yi Guqin was the master of the sword. At a certain moment, Yi Guqin suddenly opened his eyes. A powerful aura surged from his body. For so many days, Yi Guqin had been enduring the pressure of the sword qi. His genuine qi realm had also broken through to Tiandi Lingxiao because of this. But this was not the most important thing. Yi Guqin raised his left hand, and a powerful 5-colored sword light rotated endlessly, and the 5 elements sword realm spread out. 5 elements sword realm. Then he raised his right hand, and endless sword light poured out, turning into a thunderbolt light ball, releasing tens of thousands of thunderbolts, and turning the surrounding space into a wild thunder prison. Heaven's Punishment Thunder Prison. Yiguchen displayed two sword principal domains at the same time. For a moment, the entire core of the sword tomb changed color. The five-colored sword light swept across the world. The wild thunder prison swept in all directions. Fusion, Ultimate Sword Realm. Yiguchen shouted coldly, and his ultimate sea of chi spun wildly. Terrifying genuine chi burst out, activating the two sword principal domains. This was not as simple as activating two sword principal domains at the same time, but fusing them into one. Rumble. The five elements sword realm and Heaven's Punishment Thunder Prison began to collide and fuse. Waves of terrifying destructive waves swept in all directions. Deep ravines were plowed in the ground by the waves of sword chi. The surrounding hills exploded, and dust filled the sky. Rumble. Finally, the two sword principal domains fused and overlapped. The power that erupted in an instant was like a nuclear bomb. Rumble. The ground was torn apart, and countless ancient swords vibrated violently. Yiguchen stood in the ultimate sword realm, like the emperor of 10,000 swords. What a powerful force! Even with Yiguchen's temperament, he could not help but take a deep breath. This was only the fusion of two sword principal domains. Strictly speaking, it was not the ultimate sword realm. Even the fusion of three sword domains was only at the entry level. The fusion of four sword domains was the true ultimate sword realm. However, Yiguchen also realized that when he performed the fusion of two sword domains, the consumption of genuine chi was huge. It was comparable to performing the third move of 10,000 Gods' Tribulation, Demonic Buddha's Tears. At this moment, the ultimate sword realm that was formed by the fusion of two sword domains suddenly became unstable, and the sword chi scattered. Yiguchen immediately dispersed it. As expected of the cultivation method of the Sky Mountain Sword Tribe. It is indeed difficult, but its power is also worthy of the name ultimate. Yiguchen's eyes flashed. Although the ultimate sword realm was difficult to cultivate, its power was proportional to its difficulty. Even with the help of the sword tomb, he could only fuse the two sword domains together, and it was not stable. However, the cultivation of the ultimate sword realm could not be rushed. Even the power of the dual sword domain was enough to satisfy Yiguchen. Yiguchen's trip to the sword tomb could be said to be a successful one. He had completely comprehended the lightning sword principle. He had also comprehended the sword essence of all creation. The ultimate sword domain had fused to form the dual sword domain. He had slightly comprehended the fourth move of 10,000 Gods' Tribulation, Heaven's End. He had completely mastered the three ultimate holy swords and could perform them at will. His cultivation level had broken through to stage 7. Yiguchen's strength had improved in all aspects. It should be time for the 5 Academies tournament. Yiguchen looked into the distance. His opponents this time were Hua Wuxiu, Jiang Fengmian, and Shangguan Jingshan. None of them were easy to deal with. However, Yiguchen was not afraid at all. Since I have to face so many opponents, then. Yiguchen paused for a moment and then said, I will give you an unforgettable surprise. Yiguchen's body was straight, and the sword chi here could no longer suppress him. Yiguchen raised his right hand, put his index finger and middle finger together, and pointed at his forehead. A wave of terrifying soul power spread out. This soul power spread out in all directions with Yiguchen as the center. Wherever it passed, the ancient swords stuck in the ground trembled even more violently. Heart Control 108,000 Swords, Dugu 9 Swords, Heart Sword Style. Yiguchen urged his soul power to control many ancient swords, flying towards him and circling around him. 1 sword, 10 swords, 100 swords, 5,000 swords, not enough. Yiguchen's eyes were cold. A strange sword essence wave spread out from his body again. Heaven and earth, sun, moon, and stars, all creation swords, listen to my command. Yiguchen shouted and displayed the sword essence of all creation again. It was known that this was the creation-level sword essence. As soon as it was displayed, the entire sword tomb roared again, causing violent tremors. What is going on? Inside and outside the sword tomb, all the sword cultivators were shocked speechless. Zimo, Qinlang, and the others were shocked. Look, the swords in the sword tomb. Some of the sword cultivators were stunned as they pointed their fingers. Everyone saw that in the sword tomb, countless ancient swords rose from the ground and flew towards the core of the sword tomb. In the end, what happened? Zimo's heart was filled with shock. At this moment, within the sword tomb, countless ancient swords were circling around Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin was like the ruler of 10,000 swords, the king of all heavens. Condense! Yi Guqin pointed his finger at the sky, and the sword essence of all creation turned into a torrent of sword qi, rushing towards the sky. The surrounding 10,000 swords returned to him, and in the end, they condensed into a dragon in the sky. That's right, a dragon sword that was completely formed by ancient swords. This dragon sword circled the sky, letting out a roar that shook the sky. Tens of thousands of ancient swords condensed into a dragon, soaring up 90,000 miles. This was the heart sword style's method of controlling swords with one's heart, and combined with the sword essence of all creation to form a spectacle. Yi Guqin took a step forward, and his figure stepped towards the sky. The dragon sword lowered its head, as if it was welcoming Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin stepped onto the dragon's head, and stood with his hands behind his back. Let's go to the Sword Monarch Ridge. Yi Guqin smiled freely, and his black hair fluttered in the wind. He wanted to ride the dragon up, shake the 9 heavens, and transform the wind and clouds into a dragon. Chapter 1003. Outside the sword catacomb, everyone was stunned. This was because they had seen a scene that they would never forget in their lives. In the depths of the sword catacomb, above the 9 heavens, layers of clouds were rolling. Countless ancient swords circled in the void and finally condensed into a dragon sword. The dragon sword roared to the heavens and the earth, dispersing the clouds in all directions. Then, a figure stepped on the void and stepped on the top of the dragon sword. It was as if the divine king had arrived and rode the dragon away. It's that mysterious genius. Gosh, what kind of technique is that? Outside the sword catacomb, all the sword cultivators who were still there were dumbfounded and had goosebumps all over their bodies. Thousands of ancient swords condensed into a dragon and soared 90,000 miles into the sky. What a magnificent and majestic sight. It's the young lord, how strong is he? Zimo's pretty face was completely sluggish. The scene in front of her was really beyond her imagination. That direction is the Sword Monarch Ridge. Qinlang was also shocked beyond words. He also noticed the direction in which the dragon sword left. The Sword Monarch Ridge is where the 5 Academies tournament is held. Could it be that the mysterious genius is going to participate in the 5 Academies tournament? Let's go and see. Everyone around the sword catacomb began to move and followed the direction in which Yi Guqin left. Let's go too. Zimo was also impatient and moved directly. Qinlang followed closely behind. The entire sword catacomb was almost empty. Everyone followed the direction in which Yi Guqin left. Inside the sword catacomb, on a snowy hill, Lung Qianhen looked in the direction in which Yi Guqin left and sighed. Creation-level sword essence? Yi Guqin, you are indeed a peerless genius of the sword Dao. I am curious to see how you will perform in the 5 Academies tournament. Even with Lung Qianhen's character, he still let out such a sigh. It could be seen how big of a shock Yi Guqin brought to him. Just as Yi Guqin was driving the dragon sword towards the Sword Monarch Ridge. In the Sword Emperor city of the Sword Emperor Ridge, the 5 Academies grand competition had finally begun. After the disciples of the 5 great academies had registered, they would immediately draw lots for the competition. In the end, when there were only 10 people left, they would be divided into 5 camps and fight for their respective academies. Very quickly, the fiery arena battle had completely begun. The surrounding crowd also started to discuss. This time, without Duguwubai, Sacred Cliff College only has one Xuanlian left who has a chance to enter the top 10. Yeah, Sacred Cliff College is probably going to be at the bottom again. Many warriors shook their heads. They were not optimistic about Sacred Cliff College. Even though there was a Xuanlian, who was ranked 4th on the sword ranking, Sacred Cliff College still couldn't reverse the situation. He really didn't show up. Duguobai, you've disappointed me. Hua Wuxiu sighed softly. At this moment, a referee's voice attracted the attention of all the warriors. This battle, Ling Emoshu of Sacred Cliff College versus Ouyang Tianji of Long River College. As soon as the referee finished speaking, a stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. That Ling Emoshu is really going to fight? TSK, this is going to be interesting. That Ouyang Tianji left Sacred Cliff College and returned to Long River College. He actually met his old boss. Sigh, Ling Emoshu is really overestimating himself. He's just a cripple. He should just watch the battle. Why is he joining in the fun? Some warriors shook their heads. Not to mention these outsiders, even the disciples of Sacred Cliff College were not clear about Ling Emoshu's situation and were worried about him. Ling Moyin bit her red lips and looked a little nervous. She knew that Ling Emoshu was not the same as before, but she didn't know how strong Ling Emoshu was now. Ling Emoshu's expression was extremely calm as he felt the gazes of the people around him. Step by step, he slowly stepped onto the arena. Opposite him, Ouyang Tianji also walked up. After Mount Saint crossing, Ouyang Tianji returned to Long River College. Long River College was originally jointly controlled by the Yin family and the Ouyang family. Sun Moon College was controlled by the Jiang family and the Shengguan family. Tensei College was controlled by the Hua family. At this moment, seeing Ling Mashu come up, Ouyang Tianji had a disdainful smile at the corner of his mouth. He said jokingly, "Senior brother Ling, you say, why are you, a cripple, joining in the fun?" Obviously, Ouyang Tianji, like the others, despised Ling Emoshu very much. Even if Ling Emoshu was once a divine mansion heavenly talent and a disciple of the Holy Emblem. But as long as he was defeated, his reputation would fall to the bottom. Not to mention that Hua Wuxiu had cut off his right arm and destroyed his divine mansion. "I have nothing to say to a traitor," Ling Emoshu said in a cold tone. "Yo, Ling Emoshu, who gave you the confidence to participate in the 5 Academies tournament? Be careful or I'll cripple your other hand." Ouyang Tianji heard this and a fierce light flashed in his eyes. The 5 Academies tournament stipulated that no one was allowed to kill. But if one acted quickly, one could directly cripple the opponent before the opponent had time to shout out and admit defeat. After Brother Duga's guidance, I'm no longer who I used to be. Ling Emoshu's eyes flashed coldly. "What, Duguobai?" Hearing Ling Emoshu's words, there was a burst of uproar around the square. They didn't expect that it was Duguobai who asked Ling Emoshu to participate in the tournament. I'm dying of laughter. Duguobai didn't dare to come out, so he pushed you, a cripple, to die. It's really interesting. Ouyang Tianji couldn't help laughing. Can we start? Ling Emoshu turned to the referee. The referee nodded slightly. Just as the referee's voice fell, Ling Emoshu turned his left hand and a long black sword fell into his hand. Sky sword technique, sky blue water. Ling Emoshu's body pulled out a residual shadow, and the sword vibrated out. He was like a swordsman, his black hair fluttering, and his sword swept out like a wave, extremely powerful. What's going on? Ouyang Tianji screamed, his eyes full of extreme disbelief. The oppressive sword chi made him feel suffocated. How could it be? Everyone's eyes were fixed on the 2 people in the arena. Even Hua Wuxiu, who didn't pay attention before, frowned slightly and looked over. Clang. In a hurry, Ouyang Tianji hurriedly blocked with his sword, but he was shocked back. His hand was numb, and his chest was stuffy, and he couldn't help but spit out a small mouthful of blood. One wrong step and all the steps were wrong. Ling Emoshu's sword power didn't decrease, and he continued to oppress Ouyang Tianji. Damn it, how is it possible? Aren't you a cripple? Ouyang Tianji roared crazily. Ling Emoshu's expression was indifferent. He held the sword in his left hand, and he was incomparably skilled. He perfectly countered Ouyang Tianji, who was holding the sword in his right hand. Sky Sword Technique, Sky Sword Ocean. Ling Emoshu's aura fluctuated, and what he emitted was the aura of a divine dwelling expert. The tip of his sword materialized, and the sword chi seemed to have turned into a tidal wave as it swept towards Ouyang Tianji. Impossible! Ouyang Tianji tried his best to resist, but the terrifying sword ocean directly drowned him. Amidst the chaotic sword chi, the sound of vomiting blood could be heard. Ouyang Tianji's figure was ruthlessly blasted out of the arena. His clothes were torn, and countless sword wounds appeared. He was on the verge of death, like a dead dog. On the other side, Ling Emoshu held the sword in his left hand. He raised the blood-stained sword and pointed it at Tensei College's Hua Wuxiu. There's no need for Brother Dugu to make a move. I, Ling Emoshu, will fight with you. As soon as his words fell, the weather changed. Chapter 1004. There were more than 500,000 people in the entire square. But at this moment, no one made a sound. Everyone held their breaths, and their eyes were frozen with shock. No one could have imagined that the divine dwelling heaven pride and holy emblem disciple, whose cultivation had been crippled by Hua Wuxiu, would rise again. What was even more unexpected was that Ling Emoshu would have the courage to challenge Hua Wuxiu once again. Senior Brother Ling. All the Sacred Cliff College disciples burst into cheers after being stunned for a moment. There were even tears in their eyes. Back then, Ling Emoshu had fought with Hua Wuxiu for the dignity of Sacred Cliff College and suffered a crushing defeat. That battle could be said to be a deep wound that fiercely cut into the hearts of all the Sacred Cliff College disciples. After that, Ling Emoshu was unable to recover from the setback, which made many disciples feel sad. Ling Moyin's temperament also changed greatly because of this. But now, the high-spirited Ling Emoshu who pointed his sword at the world had appeared again. He had easily defeated Ouyang Tianji, who was at the divine dwelling stage, with 2 or 3 strikes. Like a blazing sun, he had risen again. Big brother! Ling Moyin couldn't help crying tears of joy. The indomitable big brother in her heart had returned once again. Moreover, Ling Moyin didn't forget that the person who saved Ling Emoshu from the abyss was Yi Guchen. Duguwubai, I owe you too much. Ling Moyin muttered in her heart. Everyone present looked at Ling Emoshu in surprise. Some of them even thought of Ling Emoshu's words. He had been reminded by Duguwubai. Could it be that the reason why Duguwubai didn't come is because he reminded Ling Emoshu to come and wash away the shame? But how did Duguwubai make Ling Emoshu rise again? Many people were puzzled. Not only was he curious about Ling Emoshu, but he was also curious about Yi Guchen. Do you think you're qualified to fight me? Hua Wuxiu put his hands behind his back and stared coldly at Ling Emoshu. Instead of Yi Guchen coming out to fight with him, what was the meaning of letting Ling Emoshu fight? Even if he had defeated Ling Emoshu, he had only defeated a loser. If news of this got out, Hua Wuxiu would not benefit at all. What Hua Wuxiu needed was to defeat the innate saint, Yi Guchen. After 3 days of separation, I have a whole new level of respect for you. Hua Wuxiu, we will eventually meet again. Ling Emoshu's eyes were filled with fighting spirit. Ling Emoshu's move could be said to have shocked everyone. Some people were even curious about Yi Guchen, who had not yet appeared. It's a pity that even if Duguwubai comes, he can only be a spectator. I'm really curious about how strong this Duguwubai, who can make Ling Emoshu rise again, is. Ling Emoshu's performance made everyone more curious about Yi Guchen. Next, the arena battle continued. However, because of Ling Emoshu's performance, the disciples of Sacred Cliff College were slightly elated, and they were not as depressed as before. The only thing that everyone felt was a pity was that Yi Guchen did not come. It could be imagined that after the 5 academies competition ended, there would be more rumors circulating throughout the Sword Dynasty. In the following arena battles, there were also some disciples of Sacred Cliff College who performed well. For example, Kong Kong, Ling Moyin, Han Lingxian, and so on, all achieved good results. Of course, there was still a certain distance to enter the top 10. In the end, nearly 2 days later, the top 10 candidates were finally chosen. 2 people from Sacred Cliff College were selected, Xuanlian and Ling Emoshu. However, the disciples of Sacred Cliff College were still not happy, because if Yiguchin was there might be 3 people selected. 3 people in the top 10 of the 5 academies competition were selected, which was definitely a grand occasion that Sacred Cliff College had never experienced before. After the top 10 of the 5 academies competition were chosen, it was time to fight for their respective academies. Then, there was another round of battles, and they began to slowly choose the strongest one. Among them, Ling Emoshu's performance was really amazing. The next battle, Ling Emoshu of Sacred Cliff College versus Hua Wuxiu of Tensei College, a referee said loudly. When the voice came out, the whole noisy sword fighting square was dead silent for a moment. Should it be a coincidence? Or was it God's will? Well, I've been waiting for this moment. In Ling Emoshu's eyes, there was not a trace of fear. Where he fell, he would get up. Even if his opponent was the extremely powerful Hua Wuxiu, Ling Emoshu did not intend to retreat in his heart. On the other side, Hua Wuxiu frowned slightly, obviously not wanting to fight with the loser again. But rules were rules. Then, the two also stepped on the arena at the same time. At this moment, the hearts of all the disciples of Sacred Cliff College were in their mouths. Ling Moyin was so nervous that she almost stopped breathing. The nightmarish scene of the past was still vivid in her mind. Would history repeat itself today? Although Ling Emoshu has reconstructed his spiritual abode, it's not good for him to go up against Hua Wuxiu. Jian Wu shook his head lightly. Indeed, Ling Emoshu is missing his right arm after all. Although I don't know where he learned to use his left hand skillfully, he is still inferior to Hua Wuxiu. Jian Shi also sighed slightly. In the arena, Ling Emoshu held the sword in his left hand, his black hair fluttering. His gaze was fixed on Hua Wuxiu, incomparably calm. Hua Wuxiu's face was still indifferent, and he said, Ling Emoshu, although I don't know how you can reconstruct your spiritual abode, a loser is a loser. How will you know if you don't try? If you want to fight Brother Dugu, you'll have to beat me first. Ling Emoshu did not say anything else, and directly drew his sword. The blade of the sword cut through the air, stabbing toward Hua Wuxiu. Hua Wuxiu shook his head lightly, and also drew out a shining divine weapon, and also held the sword in his left hand. It was his quasi-tribulation divine weapon, the light sword of the light and shadow dual swords. By the way, Hua Wuxiu is also good at using dual swords, and his mastery of the sword in his left hand is not inferior to that of his right hand. This time, Ling Emoshu is in danger. Some warriors could not help but say, Ling Emoshu's left-handed sword could indeed restrain some sword cultivators who only knew how to use their right hand. But against Hua Wuxiu, who was also good at using his left hand, Ling Emoshu had no advantage. This kind of battle was extremely disadvantageous for Ling Emoshu. Clang. In the arena, the two of them fought. Ling Emoshu took the initiative to attack, and the blade of his sword was extremely aggressive, stabbing toward Hua Wuxiu, as if he wanted to pour out all the decadence and humiliation he had suffered over the years. On the other hand, Hua Wuxiu's expression was extremely calm and indifferent. With his right hand behind his back and the light sword in his left hand, he blocked all of Ling Emoshu's attacks. Looking at the situation, many elders of Sacred Cliff College frowned slightly. Ling Emoshu's performance was already amazing enough. After being decadent for so long, his first attack was still so powerful. But Hua Wuxiu was even more calm. Sword force flow. Seeing that he could not break through Hua Wuxiu's defense, Ling Emoshu directly burst out with his strongest move. The transformed flawless spiritual abode in his body erupted with a terrifying amount of vital energy, which was transmitted to the blade. The vigorous sword light swept out like a torrent. Interesting. Hua Wuxiu's lips curled into a faint smile. Sword of light, daybreak. Hua Wuxiu added the power of Komyo Kendo, and the blade of his sword suddenly trembled and swept out, colliding with Ling Emoshu's sword force. A loud clang was heard, and it shattered everyone's eardrums. Ling Emoshu's figure was directly pushed back to the edge of the arena. In an instant, Hua Wuxiu flipped his right hand, and a shadow sword that was as dark as the night appeared in his hand. He swept the sword toward Ling Emoshu. Sword of shadow, shadow blade. The ink-black sword light turned into a sharp blade and swept toward Ling Emoshu's left arm. Hua Wuxiu's move was not to take Ling Emoshu's life, but to cut off his left arm as well. His thoughts were truly vicious. If Ling Emoshu lost his left arm, it would definitely be more painful than death. Seeing this, everyone could not help but hold their breaths. Oh no! Everyone from Sacred Cliff College turned pale. At this moment, a figure flashed onto the arena at an extremely fast speed and stood in front of Ling Emoshu. Xiaoyin. Ling Moshu was shocked. His eyes were bloodshot, and his eyes were about to crack. The person who flashed onto the arena was Ling Moyin. Big brother, Xiaoyin can't let you lose your left arm. Ling Moyin smiled sadly. The sword of shadow was about to hit Ling Moyin's delicate body. Ling Moyin closed her eyes and gritted her teeth. Even if she died, she did not want to see her brother suffer. At this moment, all the noise in the world seemed to have been removed. Clang. An ear-piercing sound of metal clashing suddenly rang out beside Ling Moyin's ears. Ling Moyin's heart trembled, and she opened her beautiful eyes in disbelief. A supreme-grade divine weapon with mystical patterns broke through the sword of shadow's attack and stabbed into the ground, letting out a continuous sword hum. Ling Moyin's delicate body suddenly froze, and she looked into the distance. Chapter 1005. At this moment, the entire bustling sword battle square was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Everyone was still in a daze. No one had expected Ling Moyin to rush into the arena. Just when everyone thought that Ling Moyin would be killed by the sword, Li Mu's expression changed. A sword broke apart Hua Wuxiu's sword move and saved Ling Moyin. At this moment, everyone's eyes were fixed on where the sword had come from. The sound of metal clashing could be faintly heard from the heavenly sword in the distance. The endless clouds seemed to be trembling. Suddenly, a long roar like a dragon's roar shook the heavens and the earth. The shadow of a dragon appeared in the misty cloud sword, accompanied by endless sword chi. It was like a mighty river of divine swords, breaking through thousands of clouds. What is that, a dragon? In the entire square, the faces of more than 500,000 warriors were frozen with unprecedented shock. No, that's not a dragon, it's a sword. A venerable swordsman narrowed his eyes and shouted involuntarily. Following this sentence, the entire square was in an uproar. That dragon shadow was actually formed by swords. Look, there's a person standing on the dragon's head. Some sharp-eyed warriors immediately pointed. The dragon's sword appeared in the sky. A cloaked figure stood on the head of the dragon sword with his hands behind his back. He was like the divine king of swords, looking down on all living beings. This scene was not only seen in the sword battle square, but also in the entire sword sovereign city. As long as all the warriors raised their heads, they could see the dragon sword with sword chi soaring into the sky. This person actually saved Ling Moyin. At this moment, everyone realized that it was this person who had attacked and saved Ling Moyin from Hua Wuxiu's hands. Ling Moyin's delicate body trembled, and tears welled up in her eyes. She already knew who this person was. He still came. On the other side, Hua Wuxiu raised his head and frowned as he stared at the figure standing on top of the dragon sword. Sensing the sword intent contained within the dragon sword, Hua Wuxiu's expression became even more solemn. Everyone present was shocked speechless by the sudden appearance of this figure. This was especially true for the dragon sword. Many sword cultivators could sense the terrifying sword intent hidden within it. "It's you actually came here." Yin Ju stepped out from the crowd and coldly looked at the figure in the sky. Yin Lin and Yin Su also exclaimed in shock, "How is this possible? Why are you here?" Some warriors who had stayed in the sword tomb also suddenly shouted, "It's him! He's the mysterious genius who stepped into the sword tomb." Well, it's actually him. It turns out that he's the mysterious genius. He's really extraordinary. If we're talking about the most famous geniuses in recent days, it would be him and Duguubai, who broke through Mount St. Crossing. Many warriors sighed. As one of the 4 secret realms, A genius who could step into the sword tomb would obviously not be a mediocre person. Therefore, some people put this mysterious genius on the same level as Duguubai. He really came. On the side of Tianxian College, Suki Miyazaki's beautiful eyes were also slightly shocked. She had always wanted to know the true identity of this person, and now it seemed that she could find out. At this time, not far away in the sky, some flying boats appeared. They were the people who had followed Yi Guqin closely. Among them were Zimo and Qin Lang. That young master really came to the 5 academies competition. Is he? Zimo was not stupid. After thinking about the cause and effect, she faintly guessed, and there was shock in her eyes. At this moment, hundreds of thousands of warriors in the square, including many outside the square, were all focused on the figure above the dragon sword. Breath, silence. The figure slowly raised his hand and slowly untied the belt of his cloak. As he untied it, a calm and indifferent voice came out. This is the Sword Dynasty 5 Academies competition. I don't want to miss it. As the voice fell, the pitch-black cloak fluttered with the wind. What was revealed was a handsome face. His eyes were deep and his lips were curled into a faint smile. If it was not Yi Guqin, who else could it be? Dead silence, absolute dead silence. It was as if everyone present was frozen in time. Not a single sound was made. 1 breath, 2 breaths, 3 breaths. After a few dozen breaths of time, some cultivators finally came back to their senses, their hoarse voices ringing out. The mysterious genius who stepped into the sword catacomb. Duguubai? Wow, after a short silence, there was a hubbub like a volcanic eruption. How is this possible? In Lin and In Su's faces were deathly pale, and their bodies trembled uncontrollably. The mysterious cloaked man turned out to be the sword demon Duguubai? Did they almost offend a natural saint? Thinking of this, In Lin's legs went soft and she directly collapsed on the ground. She could not imagine what would have happened if she had gone a little too far. In Ju was also shocked and his eyes were full of disbelief. Duguubai, how is it possible? He has already passed the 20th level of Mount St. Crossing. How can he step into the sword catacomb? In Ju's face was tense and he was unwilling to believe it. But the fact was in front of him, he had to believe it. On the other hand, Suki Miyazaki's beautiful face was also stiff and very unnatural. She would never have guessed that the mysterious sovereign who had piqued her curiosity and made her feel a little frustrated was Yi Guqin. Because of Mu Xingzu, Suki Miyazaki had an instinctive dislike for Yi Guqin. But now that the truth was revealed, Suki Miyazaki could not help but believe it. The people who were most shocked were the Divine Cliff team who had followed them here. Although they had already expected this, Zimo's eyes were still wide open and her heart was pounding. She had actually crossed paths with her idol. As for Qin Lang, his face was extremely pale and his forehead was sweating profusely. Thinking of the way he had treated Yi Guqin previously, he felt his legs go soft. He was a Silver Emblem disciple and he dared to treat a Holy Emblem disciple like that. Qin Lang had the urge to roll his eyes and faint. The other members of the Divine Cliff team were also pleasantly surprised. It's really you? Jian Shisan mumbled to himself in the sky. Kenpo, Jian Shi, and the others were also a little surprised. On the other hand, the sword son from the aristocratic families looked at Yi Guqin with a serious expression. Of course, the people from Sacred Cliff College were the most surprised. Bei Xian Elder, Grand Elder Ime, the 5 temple masters, and the other higher-ups had already known, but they still had smiles on their faces. To be honest, they found it unbelievable that Yi Guqin could step into the sword catacomb. As for the ordinary disciples, they cheered with all their might. Kong Kong, Han Lingxian, Yen Choku, and the others also smiled as if relieved of a heavy burden. Yi Guqin now seemed to have become the backbone of the Sacred Cliff College disciples. As long as Yi Guqin was here, all the Sacred Cliff College disciples would be able to settle down. As for Yi Guqin's enemies, they were unwilling to believe that Yi Guqin had stepped into the sword catacomb. Hua Wuxiu frowned and completely regarded Yi Guqin as the most troublesome enemy. Brother Dugu, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Ling Emoshu did not look too happy. He had still lost to Hua Wuxiu. Don't be discouraged. After all, You've only just recovered from your cultivation. Let me do the rest. Yiguchen stood on the dragon sword with a calm expression. Dugubai, I think you've forgotten that the registration date has already passed. Even if you show up, you won't be able to participate. Hua Wuxiu calmed down and said calmly. Although Yi Guchen was the mysterious prodigy, Hua Wuxiu's heart was indeed shaken. But he was still confident that he could suppress Yi Guchen. As soon as he said that, there was a hubbub of discussion in the audience. Indeed, Yi Guchen did bring about a shock. But this could not break the rules of the 5 academies competition. Oh, is that so? I've heard that if you want to participate in the 5 academies competition, there's a special case that allows me to participate. Yiguchen smiled and said calmly. As soon as he said that, the audience quieted down again. Even Hua Wuxiu raised his eyebrows and looked at Yiguchen. You mean, yes, it's the mode of 1 man can be 1,000 men. Yiguchen said, his voice spreading in all directions. Chapter 1006. The 5 Academies tournament had its own rules. Firstly, the participants had to be from the 5 academies. Secondly, they had to register before they could participate in the 5 academies tournament. Although Yiguchen met the first condition, he missed the opportunity to register because he was cultivating in the Sword Tomb. Moreover, registration was not allowed to be substituted, so Yiguchen missed the opportunity. However, there was a special rule in the 5 academies tournament. This special rule was strength of 1,000 men. The so-called strength of 1,000 men mode was to challenge all the heavenly talents in the 5 academies tournament. As long as any heavenly talent chose to activate the strength of 1,000 men mode, he had to accept the challenge of any other heavenly talent. In other words, Yiguchen activated the strength of 1,000 men mode. All the heavenly talents participating in the 5 academies tournament could challenge him. What was more terrifying was that there was no gap in this kind of challenge. In other words, Yiguchen could not rest and had to accept the challenge round after round. What was even more abnormal was that this kind of challenge did not limit the number of people. Those who were conceited could choose to challenge Yiguchen one-on-one. If they did not want to lose face, even a group of people was allowed to besiege him. This was the essence of the strength of 1,000 men mode. However, although this kind of exception existed, no one had activated this mode since the beginning of the 5 academies tournament. Because the difficulty of the strength of 1,000 men mode was too abnormal, no one dared to challenge it. Even someone as strong as Hua Wuxiu did not consider it at all. The gap between the heavenly talents in the top 10 of the sword list was not particularly big. After activating the strength of 1,000 men mode, Hua Wuxiu might be able to defeat 1 or 2 people of the same level, or even 2 or 3 people. However, it was obviously unrealistic for him to challenge everyone. Now, when Yiguchen's voice was heard, there was dead silence. Everyone's eyes were filled with extreme surprise and amazement. Duguwubai is going to activate the strength of 1,000 men mode? Is he serious? Many martial artists looked at each other. In the 5 academies tournament, there was no precedent for this. Young friend Dugu, don't be impulsive. On the side of Sacred Cliff College, the expressions of the 5 temple masters and many elders changed abruptly. Even Kenfuzi frowned and said, "Little friend Dugu, you don't have to be like this. The 5 academies competition is nothing." Obviously, compared to Sacred Cliff College winning first place in the 5 academies competition, Kenfuzi did not want anything to happen to Yiguchen. After all, this kind of one-man army mode was the most prone to accidents. If a group of people were to surround him, the slightest lapse in concentration could result in his cultivation being crippled. If a natural-born saint like Yi Guchen was crippled, Sacred Cliff College wouldn't even be able to cry. The group of Divine Cliff Academy's disciples spoke one after another after some consideration. "Senior Brother Dugu, you don't have to do this. Yes, we all know that you want to win honor for Sacred Cliff College. You don't have to be so stubborn." Although Yi Guchen was quite prestigious among the disciples of Sacred Cliff College, one-man army mode was too powerful. However, the mode of 1 man against 1,000 men was too abnormal. No matter how confident he was in Yi Guchen, he was not confident. Dugubai, you really don't have to fight so hard. Ling Moin, Han Lingxian, and the others were all worried about Yiguchen. Confuzi and Dugubai have such courage. Why do you have to persuade him? On the side of Tensei College, Hua Yuntao laughed heartily, but he was secretly delighted. He had wanted Hua Wuxiu to cripple Yiguchen in the tournament. Hua Yuntao felt that it was a pity that Yiguchen did not come. Who knew that Yiguchen would actually dig a hole and jump into it himself? Hua Yuntao was naturally happy. In such a chaotic battle, all of Yiguchen's enemies would make a move. It would be too easy to cripple Yiguchen. Not only him, but all of Yiguchen's opponents had the same thought. Ouyang Fengyun, Shangguan Jingshan, Yushuang Yan in Wufeng in Ju, and so on. Yiguchen's opponents were too many. Thank you for your concern, but I can still handle this situation, Yiguchen said calmly. As soon as these words came out, the hundreds of thousands of warriors around were speechless. His tone seemed humble, but if one thought about it carefully, it could be said that he was not arrogant. Interesting. Is he looking down on all the heroes in the world? Inju was so angry that he laughed. They were all prodigies on the sword roll. Not to mention in the Sword Dynasty, even in the 100 Great Dynasties, they were considered top-notch existences. Now, they were being looked down upon by Yiguchen. Sigh, he's too arrogant. Suki Miyazaki shook her head slightly. She had to admit that she was indeed shocked when she found out that Yiguchen was the mysterious prodigy who had crossed the 10,000 feet mark. But shock aside, in Suki Miyazaki's opinion, Yiguchen's chances of winning were too small for him to challenge the one man can hold back thousands mode. Not to mention the others, just Hua Wuxiu alone was enough to make Yiguchen suffer. Of course, this was Suki Miyazaki's opinion. She did not know Yiguchen's ability. Duguwubai's move is not very wise. In the sky, Jian Wu frowned. I believe that Brother Dugu has his own ideas. Kenpo did not comment. As for Jian Shisan, he just stared silently at Yiguchen, as if he was thinking about something. In short, everyone present was talking about it, but almost no one thought that Yiguchen would succeed. It was not that they underestimated Yiguchen's strength. But if it was Hua Wuxiu, the chances of success were also very slim. Duguwubai, are you sure you want to activate the one man can hold back thousands mode? A referee asked Yiguchen again. Everyone in the surroundings held their breaths. Everyone from the Divine Cliff Academy was praying in their hearts that Yiguchen would not agree. However, Yiguchen still had a calm smile on his face. The Sword Dynasty is a country where swordsmen gather. There are so many swordsmen. Today, I can fight against all the swordsmen. It's really a great thing in life. How can I not be happy? Yiguchen smiled freely. He was a sword demon and a battle maniac. His swordsmanship could only be improved through the baptism of battle. And after training in the sword tomb, Yiguchen was confident in himself. Well, in that case, wait until the 5 academies ranking is out before you start the challenge, the referee said. Since Yiguchen had chosen the one man can hold back thousands mode, he would be the last. It would be his turn after all the matches were over. If Yiguchen could survive, he would be the first in the 5 academies competition. If he could not, the previous first in the competition would inherit it. In the following time, Yiguchen stood calmly on the dragon sword in the sky. The rest of the swordsmen's battles also began again. However, most of the people's eyes were still focused on Yiguchen. After all, Yiguchen was the first to choose the one man can hold back thousands mode. I didn't expect to see the one man can hold back thousands mode in this 5 academies competition. Yes, I wonder if Duguwubai can succeed in the end? If he succeeds, then Duguwubai is really a monster. He broke through the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing and stepped into the sword tomb. Tiske, it's exciting just thinking about it. Many warriors were also talking about it. Time continued to pass. The last match was finally over. The last match was between Xuanlian and Hua Wuxiu. It had to be said that Hua Wuxiu was a 7th-class heavenly talent with the sacred body of light and darkness. He was indeed very powerful. Even Xuanlian, who was the 9th Sword Buddha, was defeated by Hua Wuxiu by half a move. Of course, only Xuanlian himself knew whether he had used his full strength or not. But all in all, Hua Wuxiu did win the first place in the end. This also agreed with most people's guess. However, there was an anomaly now. The noise of the audience stopped at this moment, and countless eyes looked at Yi Guqin in unison. The one man can hold back thousands mode was officially activated. Chapter 1007. At this moment, Yi Guqin was the focus of everyone's attention. Worry, anxiety, watching a show, indifference, disdain, insidiousness, there were all kinds of gazes. Facing these gazes, Yi Guqin's expression was calm and indifferent. Dubai, this old man will warn you again. The one man can hold thousands mode can't guarantee your safety because you might be attacked by a group. The judge warned him again. He could be considered to be on the side of rogue cultivators, so he reminded him again. Thank you for the reminder. I understand. Yi Guqin said indifferently. Well then, you have two ways to succeed in the one mount against thousands mode. The first is to survive for 3 days. As long as you can last for 3 days, you win. The second is to fight until no one dares to challenge you, or defeat everyone. These were the two ways to win in the one mount against thousands mode. In comparison, everyone felt that the first way to succeed was barely acceptable. The premise was that Yi Guqin had the strength to last for 3 days. After all, in these 3 days, almost all of Yi Guqin's enemies would attack. As for the second way, no one thought it would appear. It was too difficult for Yi Guqin to defeat everyone or make everyone not dare to challenge him. Even Hua Wuxiu couldn't subdue all the prodigies. If you're ready, then let's begin. The referee sighed. Yi Guqin stood in the sky. In the clouds, there was a faint rumble of thunder, as if a storm was coming. With a sword in hand, the clouds in all directions move. Let me ask the world, who is the hero? I, Dugubai, am here to challenge all the prodigies of the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty. All of you, go. Yi Guqin let out a loud shout. At the same time, there was a rumble. A bolt of lightning streaked across the sky, and the rumbling of thunder seemed to echo Yi Guqin's words. One person, challenging all the prodigies of the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty. This scene made everyone's blood boil. Senior Dugu is invincible. Senior brother Dugu is mighty. All the Sacred Cliff College students roared madly. Who among the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty was as arrogant as Yi Guqin? Among the geniuses of the Sword Dynasty, who had Yi Guqin's boldness? Upon hearing this, Hua Wuxiu, Yinju, and Shangguan Jingshan's faces darkened. However, they did not attack directly. This was because they couldn't gauge Yi Guqin's strength. After all, Yi Guqin had stepped into the sword tomb before. No one would believe that his strength had not improved. Moreover, Hua Wuxiu and the others were not willing to be the first to act and be the one to test the sword. Therefore, in this strange silence, no one actually made the first move. This caused whispers to ring out from the crowd. Those who did not know better would think that Yi Guqin alone was enough to make all the prodigies not dare to make the first move. At this moment, Hua Wuxiu's lips moved slightly as he secretly transmitted his voice. He was meticulous and would never underestimate any opponent. Therefore, he would not be the first to act. After Hua Wuxiu transmitted his voice, some of the Tensei College prodigies also stepped forward one by one. Although they were not as strong as the top 10 on the sword leaderboard, many of them were still in the top 50. Finally, a prodigy stepped into the air and attacked Yi Guqin. Upon seeing this person, Yi Guqin's lips curled into a faint smile. He also understood that someone like Hua Wuxiu would not be the first to act. Yi Guqin raised his hand, and vigorous true energy gushed out from his meridians. Sword chi shot out from his finger and directly sent that prodigy flying. Following that, more and more prodigies stepped forward. Not only Tensei College but also Sun Moon College and Long River College also had prodigies step forward. No one from Tianxian College made a move. Naturally, no one from Sacred Cliff College would make a move. In the blink of an eye, more than a dozen prodigies stepped forward. The strength of these dozen prodigies was mostly at the 9th level of the Spirit Bridge of Heaven and Earth. Yi Guqin's true energy burst out, and the 6-pulse divine sword was displayed one after another. Yi Guchen's sword chi shot out from between his fingers and pierced through the air. One prodigy after another was sent flying, spitting out blood. Tiandi Lingqiao? As soon as Yi Guchen made a move, his strength was also perceived by everyone. It's only been a few months, and he has broken through to the 7th level. This speed is indeed fast. Yes, it is indeed surprising that a Divine Dwelling stage expert has battle power comparable to that of a level 7 Divine Dwelling expert. However, it is still a little too much for him to fight against Hua Wuxiu and the others, right? Many people were discussing. Tiandi Lingqiao? Hua Wuxiu's lips curved into a cold smile. On the other side of the sky, Jian Wu and the others frowned. Although Yi Guchen's cultivation level had improved very quickly, he was still at a disadvantage before reaching the Divine Dwelling stage. Believe in Brother Dugu. Kenpo had some confidence. The prodigies who had stepped forward were all at the Spirit Bridge of Heaven and Earth stage, and they could not pose any threat to Yi Guchen. Let me fight you. A cold and harsh voice sounded. It was Yuxuangyan. After studying at Tensei College, her strength had also greatly improved. Not only her, but Hua Xingjie, Yin Wufeng and the others had also participated in the 5 academies competition. At this moment, they had all stepped forward. These people were the enemies who had competed with Yi Guchen in the 5 academies selection. At that time, these people could still pose some obstacles to Yi Guchen. But now, looking at the people besieging him, Yi Guchen's expression was indifferent, without the slightest ripple. He did not even bring out the 9-Dragon Thunder Prison, but took out another top-grade mystical rune weapon. 3 ultimate sacred swords, Star Breaker Sword. The vigorous, genuine Qi, accompanied by the star-like sword light, swept toward these people. Feeling the fierce fluctuations of the sword light, Hua Xingjie, Yuxuangyan, and Yin Wufeng's expressions changed. Yi Guchen's strength, after going through the baptism of Mount Saint Crossing and the Sword Tomb, was no longer the same as before. Ice Soul Heavenly River Sword. 9 Hell Sword. Heaven Conquering Sword. The 3 people's qi burst out, and they all used their trump cards. With a loud bang, the sword qi collided, bursting out ripples, and swept the surrounding void. The 3 people were directly knocked back. Yi Guchen's sword sign changed again. 3 ultimate sacred swords, Star Breaker Sword. 2 swords combine, Star Sun Flowing Fire. Yi Guchen used the combination of the Star Breaking Sword and the Qian Yang Sword, the Star Sun Flowing Fire. The mighty and blazing sword light swept out like flowing magma. It was accompanied by vomiting blood and screams. Hua Xingjie, Yin Wufeng, and Yuxuangyan were shot down from the sky and smashed hard on the ground. Their bodies were charred black, and their limbs twitched non-stop. One move had almost crippled the 3 geniuses. Dead silence. The whole place was dead silent. When some of the geniuses saw this, they secretly swallowed a mouthful of saliva. Although Hua Xingjie and the others were not in the top 10 geniuses of the sword roll, they were definitely not mediocre people. But now, the 3 of them together could not even touch the corner of Yi Guchen's clothes. How? How is this possible? In the pit on the ground, Yuxuangyan vomited blood, and her cold eyes were filled with disbelief. During the 5 academies selection, they could still fight back and forth with Yi Guchen. But now, the 3 of them together could not even take one move from Yi Guchen. You don't have to send these small fries to test me. If you want to fight, come at me. Yi Guchen said indifferently. Hearing these words, Hua Xingjie and the others felt their hearts being attacked, causing them to vomit blood again. I didn't have the chance to fight to my heart's content in the ancient chaos wasteland. This time, I finally have the chance. Duwubai, let me see if your strength is worthy of your arrogance. A man in white walked out with a majestic gait. His aura burst forth, and his battle intent was astonishing. It was Ouyang Fengyun, ranked 9th on the sword roll. Finally, a top 10 genius on the sword roll is going to fight. That was just a warm-up. This is the main show. Something to watch. Seeing that Ouyang Fengyun was about to fight, everyone present perked up. They were very curious. Would Yiguchen be able to withstand a true top 10 genius on the sword roll, a divine dwelling realm genius? Chapter 1008. Ouyang Fengyun. Seeing Ouyang Fengyun step out, Yiguchen's eyes also surged with coldness. He didn't forget that if Ouyang Fengyun hadn't interfered halfway in the ancient chaos wasteland, he might have been able to obtain 2 map fragments. One must know that there were also heaven prides from other empires at that time. Ouyang Fengyun didn't care about the big picture and didn't hesitate to fight among himself to deal with Yiguchen for his own personal gain. Therefore, when Ouyang Fengyun attacked, Yiguchen's eyes only had coldness in them. Ouyang Fengyun, you actually dared to take the initiative to attack. Since that's the case, I'll grant you your wish. Yiguchen's eyes shot out a sharp light. The mystical rune weapon in his hand spun, and a sword light shot out. Impudent, what right do you have to speak in such a tone? Ouyang Fengyun rebuked angrily. Yiguchen's words seemed to put Ouyang Fengyun in a lower position. But in fact, with Yiguchen's current strength, there was indeed no need for him to be afraid of Ouyang Fengyun. Ouyang Fengyun activated the emperor-grade cultivation technique of the Ouyang family, the Longhu secret manual. The true qi of the first level of the divine dwelling realm burst out, faintly forming the shape of a dragon and a tiger around him. It was a different type of true qi, the Longhu grand true qi. Cloud Dragon Sword, out. Ouyang Fengyun summoned the Cloud Dragon Sword at the same time, and it collided with Yiguchen's sword light. A clanging sound burst forth, piercing through the clouds. Ouyang Fengyun charged forward with his sword, while Yiguchen's figure rose from the top of the dragon sword. A sword light turned into a river of stars and swept towards Ouyang Fengyun. Dragon swimming sword technique, dragon swimming in 4 directions. Ouyang Fengyun changed his sword technique, and sword qi swept out in all directions. Rumble, rumble, rumble. The 2 figures collided like 2 great stars, erupting with a violent rumble and transparent sword qi ripples sweeping out in all directions. Looking at the 2 people who were locked in battle, exclamations of surprise sounded out from the surroundings of the sword battle plaza. He actually withstood it. Dugubai is only at the 7th level, but he's able to fight on par with the divine dwelling heaven pride. Many people's eyes were filled with surprise. It wasn't easy to challenge someone of a higher level. Let's not forget that it was an entire cultivation realm. After exchanging blows, Ouyang Fengyun's face darkened. Yiguchen's current strength was obviously stronger than when he was in the ancient chaos wasteland. Ouyang Fengyun could clearly feel the pressure. Although he couldn't openly kill Yiguchen, it was enough to cripple Yiguchen. He seemed to have seen the coldness in Ouyang Fengyun's eyes. Yiguchen smiled indifferently. Do you want to cripple me? Come at me. Don't be so arrogant, Cloud Sword Wei. Ouyang Fengyun's expression turned fierce as he released the Cloud Sword Wei's sword domain, Cloud Mountain Mist Sea. In an instant, the sword qi around his body turned into clouds and spread out. Dragon swimming sword art, dragon roars to the 9 heavens. Ouyang Fengyun's sword technique changed again, and the cloud dragon sword in his hand repeatedly thrust out. The surrounding clouds and mist tumbled, turning into mist dragons that charged towards Yiguchen with endless sword qi. Starbreaker Sword, Moon Sword, Star and Moon Reversal. Yiguchen successively used 2 of the 3 ultimate holy swords and then merged them together. In an instant, the stars and moon appeared in the void at the same time, protecting Yiguchen's body. The Cloud Dragon Sword qi collided with the shadows of the stars and moon, bursting out endless waves of sword qi. At that moment, another sword suddenly rushed out from the thick clouds and mist. The sword shook the void as if it was letting out a tiger's roar. Oh no! The hearts of many Sacred Cliff College's disciples suddenly rose. There was actually a sword hidden within the clouds. This was something that no one had expected. Wind Tiger Sword. Ouyang Fengyun sneered. The Wind Tiger Sword seemed to have pierced through the void and stabbed towards Yiguchen's back. Yiguchen snorted. His body shook, and the dazzling 9-colored lightning in his body surged out and rushed towards the Wind Tiger Sword. It was the power of the 9-colored lightning. Rumble. The Wind Tiger sword collided with the 9-colored lightning and its speed instantly slowed down. Yiguchen took the opportunity to use Imminent Skyline. His body flashed and slashed towards Ouyang Fengyun's head. Terrifying lightning vibrated on the blade and spread out in all directions. It was the Divine Sword Art's Thunder Control Technique's special skill, Myriad Thunder. Dragon Swimming Sword Art, Dragon Roaring in the 9 Heavens. Ouyang Fengyun's expression changed when he saw it. As the blade moved, there seemed to be a dragon's roar and sword chi gushed out. At the same time, Ouyang Fengyun activated another sword principle. Wind Sword Principle, Wind Shadow Step. Ouyang Fengyun also knew 2 sword principles. He even used the Wind Sword Principle. It seems that Ouyang Fengyun is going all out. Some of the warriors saw this and could not help but sigh. Ouyang Fengyun was like his name. He knew both the Wind Sword Principle and the Cloud Sword Principle. Normally, Ouyang Fengyun would only use one sword principle. If he used 2 sword principles at the same time, it meant that he was going all out. You actually forced me to use my Wind Sword Principle. Dugawubai, you are indeed capable. However, this is the end. Ouyang Fengyun's expression was cold. He did not expect that he would have to go all out to deal with Yiguchen. Go all out. Otherwise, you won't have a chance. Yiguchen's expression was still indifferent. Wind Sword Principle, Sky Slash. Ouyang Fengyun shouted coldly. He held the Cloud Dragon Sword and the Wind Tiger Sword in both hands and slashed towards Yiguchen's head at the same time. With the support of the Wind Sword Principle, the sword was extremely fast. It was as if it could really cut through the void. Its speed was extremely fast. Divine Sword Lightning Controlling Technique, Heavenly Thunder Attraction. Yiguchen raised his sword and pointed it at the sky. In an instant, there was a loud roar in the sky. The sky, which was already covered by dark clouds, was filled with rolling thunder. Then, a thunderbolt suddenly came down and was drawn into the sword blade. This move, Heavenly Thunder Attraction, was the ultimate killing move of the Divine Sword Lightning Controlling Technique. It was extremely powerful. The 2 sword moves collided again. One side was drawing the power of the Heavenly Thunder, while the other side was supporting the power of the Wind Sword Principle. With a loud bang, it was as if a big star had exploded. Violent air shock waves swept in all directions. Confuzi and the other pseudo-saints frowned slightly. They waved one hand to block the void in all directions. Only then did the battle fluctuations not spread out. And in the midst of such an extreme collision, the 2 figures retreated at the same time. Ouyang Fengyun's body trembled and he felt numb all over. His sword-holding arm was even charred black. His chest shook violently, and he could not help but cough up a mouthful of blood. On the other side, Yiguchen was also shaken back, but his situation was much better than Ouyang Fengyun's. After all, his physical body was stronger than Ouyang Fengyun's. Again, Yiguchen's fighter jet was very powerful. Seeing Ouyang Fengyun in a disadvantageous position, he immediately rushed forward again. Damn it, Dugawubai, you're too arrogant. Seeing Yiguchen closing in, Ouyang Fengyun was furious. He had never been in such a sorry state. The cloud follows the dragon, the wind follows the tiger. Wind and cloud realm, the sword breaks the sky. Ouyang Fengyun gathered all the genuine chi in his body. The 2 swords, Cloud Dragon and Wind Tiger, merged into one and turned into a sword. An extremely powerful sword chi fluctuation uncontrollably spread out, causing the surrounding space to emit a crackling sound. Ouyang Fengyun is going to fight with all his strength. Seeing this scene, all the cultivators present were unable to take their eyes off it. They did not even blink, afraid that they would miss this wonderful scene. Could Ouyang Fengyun defeat Yiguchen with all his strength? Chapter 1009. Ouyang Fengyun was ranked 9th on the sword leaderboard. His strength was obvious to all. Now, Yiguchen was able to force Ouyang Fengyun to such an extent. This was something no one had expected. Dugubai was able to pass the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. It seems that it's not just because of his spiritual will. His strength is definitely not weak. Many warriors sighed in their hearts when they saw this. Previously, the crowd had not been able to figure out Yi Guqin's strength. Coupled with the smearing of the Hua family and other pseudo-saint families, many people also believed that Yi Guqin had only relied on his strong spiritual will to pass the 20th level of Mount Saint Crossing. But now, Yi Guqin's performance had completely silenced those who questioned him. I wonder if Dugu Wubai will be able to take Ouyang Fengyun's move? Many people were watching intently. At this moment, Ouyang Fengyun was simultaneously augmenting his Wind Sword Principle and Cloud Sword Principle. Although he could not combine the two sword principles, the power released at this moment was enough to shock people. Dugu Wubai, can you take this move of mine? Ouyang Fengyun roared. Clouds follow the dragon, wind follows the tiger. Wind Cloud Realm, sword piercing the firmament. The two swords combined into one, augmented by the power of dual sword principles, and slashed horizontally at Yi Guqin. In an instant, the wind and clouds shook and the sky changed color. Ouyang Fengyun's sword was extremely powerful. Even those prodigies who had not yet made a move, such as Hua Wuxiu, Jiang Fengyan, Shangguan Jingshan, and Yin Ju, frowned slightly. Even they had to treat this move with caution. In the face of Ouyang Fengyun's powerful trump card, Yi Guqin was not afraid at all. There was no change in his expression at all. Once again, he unleashed the three ultimate holy swords. However, this time around, it was different from before. Yi Guqin first used the Earth-Moon Absolute Sword, and a blue crescent-like sword light spread out. Following that, Yi Guqin once again displayed the Absolute Sword of Qianyang. The blazing sword light was as dazzling as the sun. Qianyang Absolute Sword, Kuan-Yu Absolute Sword, combine the two swords, Qian Kuan Extermination. Yi Guqin raised his sword and a powerful sword qi surged out. Qianyang and Kuan-Yu merged into one in the void. In the blink of an eye, an even more ferocious wave of sword qi spread out. It was the combination of the two moves, Universe Annihilation. This was already an extremely powerful move of the three Absolute's holy swords. It was second only to the fusion of the three moves. The sword that carried the power of the sun and moon collided with Ouyang Fengyun's ultimate move. Rumble! A blinding light burst out, bringing with it a destructive ripple that swept out in all directions. If it weren't for the false sage experts, the aftermath would have been enough to injure the group of heaven and earth spiritual bridge sky prides around the sword battle square. The dazzling sword light burst out. Everyone squinted their eyes, wanting to see the outcome. In the violent collision, the two figures retreated at the same time. However, Yi Guqin was forced to retreat. Ouyang Fengyun, on the other hand, spat out blood like a kite with a broken string and flew out. A huge sword scar appeared on his chest, and one could almost see his sternum. It looked extremely terrifying. Defeated. Ouyang Fengyun has been defeated. After the collision of the two moves, there was a moment of dead silence. Then, there was a deafening uproar. The sky pride of the Ouyang family, Ouyang Fengyun, who ranked 9th on the sword leaderboard, had been defeated by Yi Guqin. In the spectator stands, Ouyang Tianji, who had been defeated by Ling Yimoshu, widened his eyes in disbelief. How is this possible? How can Big Brother be defeated by him? Rumble! Ouyang Fengyun fell from the sky and smashed hard on the arena. He kept vomiting blood, which dyed the front of his clothes red. Not to mention the others, even Ouyang Fengyun himself could not believe it. His eyes were bloodshot as he stared at Yi Guqin in the sky. In the ancient chaos wasteland, he thought that Yi Guqin was just SOSO. But now, the one who was beaten like a dead dog was him. Senior brother Dugu is mighty. The disciples of Sacred Cliff College heaved a sigh of relief and cheered loudly. No matter what, Yi Guqin had proven himself. However, in the face of all kinds of exclamations and astonishment, Yi Guqin's expression was calm. Defeating Ouyang Fengyun was nothing to him. Then, the scene fell into a strange silence again. After Yi Guqin defeated Ouyang Fengyun, some heaven prides did not dare to casually attack Yi Guqin. At least the heaven prides below the divine dwelling stage looked at Yi Guqin with fear in their eyes as if they were looking at a ghost. Hua Wuxiu took a deep look at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin was more difficult to deal with than he had imagined. but he still did not choose to attack. Dugubai, you said that you would eliminate me on Mount St. Crossing. Then let me fight you. A red-haired man dressed in red armor stepped out. He carried a blood-red sword as tall as a person on his back. It was Shangguan Jingshan. Whether it was because of Yi Guchen's words or because of Mu Xingzu, Shangguan Jingshan could not avoid a battle with Yi Guchen. Although Yi Guchen had defeated Ouyang Fengyun was ranked 9th on the sword list after all. And Shangguan Jingshan was ranked 7th on the sword list. There was still a certain gap between them. Moreover, Shangguan Jingshan was confident in himself. Seeing Shangguan Jingshan make a move, the atmosphere of the entire sword duel plaza rose again. Shangguan Jingshan was clearly stronger than Ouyang Fengyun. Cousin, are you all right? In the stands, Shangguan Yen showed a worried look. Shangguan Yen did not think that Yi Guchen would be a match for Shangguan Jingshan. But now, Shangguan Yen was a little nervous. Seeing Shangguan Jingshan step forward, Yi Guchen's expression was equally calm. He said calmly, since Xingzhu doesn't like you, if you lose this battle, you're not allowed to pester Xingzhu anymore. These slightly domineering words made Mu Xingzhu blush slightly. Her heart was filled with sweetness. Oh little girl, are you shy? Yinglang could not help but tease. Shangguan Jingshan is not that simple. It won't be that easy for Dugubai to defeat him either. Not to mention, he also suffered some damage from his previous battle with Ouyang Fengyun. A cold voice sounded. It was Suki Miyazaki. You don't have to worry about that. My master will definitely succeed. Mu Xingzhu raised her eyebrows. Then let's wait and see. Suki Miyazaki did not say much. Now that the 7th on the sword leaderboard had appeared, everyone's attention was focused on him again. All right, whoever loses this battle will stay away from Xingzhu. Shangguan Jingshan stomped his foot, and an explosive sound rang out. A powerful rebound force sent him shooting high into the sky like a cannonball. He took out the quasi-tribulation divine weapon on his back, the Balrog Sharktooth sword. Vigorous flame true chi burst forth, causing the entire sword to burn with flames. Overlord slash. Shangguan Jingshan held the sword with both hands and slashed it toward Yi Guchen. Vigorous flaming sword chi burst forth, as if forming a wave of fire that swept out. A wave of scorching heat spread in all directions. It was obvious that Shangguan Jingshan cultivated a fire attribute cultivation technique. Moreover, the path of his sword was different from Ouyang Fengyun's. Ouyang Fengyun's was nimble and ethereal, and the wind and clouds changed constantly. Shangguan Jingshan, on the other hand, was strong enough to break through 10 techniques. The path of his sword was extremely domineering. Every strike was as heavy as 1,000 pounds, and carried with it scorching heat. Yi Guchen was not careless in the face of such an ultimate move. He immediately displayed the sword domain of the edgeless way of the sword, the gravity sword domain. In the void, an ancient divine mountain appeared, and a heavy force pressed down on Shangguan Jingshan. Another peerless way of the sword. A single stone stirred up 1,000 ripples. Everyone present was dumbfounded. They had no idea how many ways of the sword Yi Guchen had mastered. Chapter 10:10. The Sword Dynasty was a country of sword cultivators, so sword Dao was not very rare. However, sword Dao was also divided into 3 grades. The ordinary grade of sword Dao was still considered common. However, the peerless grade of sword Dao was rare. It was already very good for a prodigy on the sword ranking to possess a peerless sword Dao. But now, Yi Guchen had once again displayed a completely different kind of peerless swordsmanship. This caused the martial artist's pupils to shrink, and they all gasped. Zimo, Qin Lang, and the others who were watching the battle from the spectator stands were also stunned. They knew that Yi Guchen had not displayed the Shura sword Dao in the sword catacomb, but 2 other types of sword Dao. In other words, senior brother Dugu possesses 3 types of peerless sword Dao. Zimo muttered involuntarily. With 3 types of peerless sword Dao, even among the prodigies of the Sword Dynasty, he was one of a kind. Dugubai has other types of peerless sword Dao besides the Shura sword Dao? Many of Yi Guchen's opponents were shocked. Even Hua Wuxiu looked at Yi Guqin in surprise. To be honest, Yi Guqin had not used his full strength in the Sword Dynasty. Therefore, many people did not know about his trump cards. This was also the reason why Hua Wuxiu did not make the first move. He wanted to let the others test Yi Guqin's trump cards. Now, Yi Guqin had finally revealed some of his trump cards. The moment Yi Guqin displayed the Gravity Sword domain, Shangguan Jingshan felt a heavy pressure sweep over him. The gravity around him was like a mountain pressing down on him. Shangguan Jingshan's strength, speed, sword momentum, and so on were all weakened and suppressed. What can these unorthodox methods do to me? Shangguan Jingshan roared. Once again, vigorous flaming true energy burst out from his body, causing the surrounding space to slightly distort. That's the Shangguan clan's emperor-level cultivation technique, the overbearing flame god's strength. Shangguan Jingshan soared into the sky with the support of the emperor-level cultivation method. The Balrog Sharktooth Greatsword slashed at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin wielded his mystical rune divine weapon and executed the star-breaking sword of absolute annihilation, similarly sweeping out. Their swords collided in an instant. Instantly, Yi Guqin felt an extremely heavy pressure crushing down along the edge of the sword. The Balrog Sharktooth sword was a heavy sword. With the addition of Shangguan Jingshan's strength, the Balrog Sharktooth sword was a heavy sword. This overlord's chop was powerful and heavy. It had a ferocious momentum that could break through 1,000 mountains. Even if he used the Gravity Sword domain, he could only offset part of it. Even Yi Guqin's mystical rune divine weapon was bent from the force. Boom! Both of them retreated. However, in the next moment, they collided again like shooting stars. Clang, clang, clang. Continuous clanging sounds rang out. It was like the violent sound of iron being forged in the heavenly realm's weapon refining room. It broke through the void and shook everyone's eardrums. Shangguan Jingshan is indeed worthy of being ranked 7th on the sword leaderboard. He's even stronger than Ouyang Fengyan. As he attacked, Yi Guqin pondered in his heart. Although there was not a huge gap between the top 10 on the sword leaderboard, there was still a gap in their strength. Moreover, each of the top 10 prodigies focused on different things. For example, Shangguan Jingshan walked the path of heavy sword strength. Yi Guqin continued to use the Gravity Sword domain. Waves of spatial vibration sword waves spread out. Even though Shangguan Jingshan was wearing the Flame God's armor, he could only weaken it but not block it. Damn it. What kind of peerless sword principle is this? I've never seen it before. Shangguan Jingshan's eyes darkened. The edgeless sword principle was a sword principle created by Duguwubai. It was impossible for Shangguan Jingshan to have seen it before. Moreover, the Gravity Sword domain was constantly suppressing Shangguan Jingshan, making it impossible for him to use his full strength. Heavenly Fire 10 consecutive slashes. Shangguan Jingshan roared and activated the Flame God's overbearing Flame God force to the extreme. He swung his sword 10 times in a row. Each strike was stronger than the previous one. It was like overlapping waves. Yi Guqin's sword blade shot out 9-colored thunder. He once again used the godly sword lightning controlling technique. Thunder and lightning burst out of the sword as he fought with Shangguan Jingshan. Now, the God-slaying sword and celestial slaying sword, the two supreme king sword principles, were slightly insufficient for Yi Guqin. Of course, the combination of the two Emperor Sword principles was still very powerful. Boom, boom, boom. The sound of a violent collision resounded through the universe. It had to be said that Shangguan Jingshan's strength was indeed not something Ouyang Fengyan could compare to. More importantly, Shangguan Jingshan seemed to also pay attention to the cultivation of his physical body. Therefore, even under the pressure of the Gravity Sword domain, his physical body was not suppressed too much. Boom. After another collision, Yi Guqin's figure retreated. The mystical rune weapon in his hand was faintly cracking. Duguwubai, you're too arrogant. Watch me defeat you with one strike. Shangguan Jingshan shouted coldly. In his opinion, Yi Guqin still did not use the 9-Dragon Thunder Prison because he was looking down on him. Therefore, Shangguan Jingshan was determined to use his ultimate move to defeat Yi Guqin with one strike. Flame God Slash. Shangguan Jingshan held the sword with both hands and raised it to the sky. The flame god's slash in his body circulated crazily, and an extremely terrifying flame chi gushed out. He slashed out with his sword, forming a flame sword chi that was hundreds of feet long. It slashed down on Yi Guchen's head. The power of this move was shocking. Senior brother Dugu. All the Sacred Cliff College disciples' hearts were in their mouths, and they were worried for Yi Guchen. In the face of Shangguan Jingshan's ultimate move, Yi Guchen was not afraid. He let go of the mystical rune weapon in his hand and let it float in the void. Then he raised his left hand and used the God-slaying sword technique. He raised his right hand and used the immortal slaying sword technique. God-slaying, immortal slaying, immortal slaying, immortal slaying. Yi Guchen clasped his palms together, and a terrifying sword chi gushed out, as if showing the tragic scene of an immortal slaying and weeping blood. The sword fiercely collided with Shangguan Jingshan's ultimate move. Boom! A giant mushroom cloud burst into the void, forming a ring of air waves that swept in all directions. Yi Guchen's body shook, and he coughed up some blood. On the other side, Shangguan Jingshan was also injured. The web between his thumb and index finger where he held the sword cracked, and blood flowed out. This time, they were evenly matched again. Dugu Wubai's physical body is not inferior to Shangguan Jingshan's at all. Seeing this scene, many martial artists were shocked. Shangguan Jingshan's physical strength was one of the best even among the top 10 prodigies on the sword roll. However, they did not know that Yi Guchen had the perfect physical body, the flawless diamond body, and the ancient god body. Although Yi Guchen's body looked thin and well-proportioned, his true strength was definitely superior to Shangguan Jingshan's. Dugu Wubai, you do have some skills, but that's all you can do. Shangguan Jingshan raised one hand, and a ghostly green flame rose. That's the bone-melting spiritual fire. Rumor has it that if one touches it, one's body and bones will be burned to ashes. When they saw Shangguan Jingshan's ghostly green flame, many of the martial artists present had a look of fear in their eyes. Chapter 10-11. Shangguan Jingshan cultivated a fire attribute cultivation method. Naturally, he did not lack the heavenly fire. The bone-melting spiritual fire was refined by Shangguan Jingshan. It was an extremely powerful heavenly fire. In normal battles, Shangguan Jingshan would not use the heavenly fire at all. But now, facing Yi Guchen, Shangguan Jingshan also restrained some of his contempt. Yi Guchen's true strength was indeed not inferior to his talent. Shangguan Jingshan raised his hand, and his palm with rising flames brushed past the Balrog shark-tooth sword. The bone-melting spiritual fire also rose inch by inch on the body of the heavy sword. After adding the power of the bone-melting spiritual fire, the power of Shangguan Jingshan's sword move was obviously stronger. Raging Shark Sword Technique. Shangguan Jingshan stepped into the void and charged toward Yi Guchen again. The heavy sword in his hand swept out horizontally, and the vigorous bone-melting spiritual fire surged up. In the end, it actually turned into a dark green flame shark that split the air and broke through the waves. It opened its mouth to swallow Yi Guchen. Even a little bit of the bone-melting spiritual fire could turn one's skin and bones into ashes. Not to mention, Shangguan Jingshan had also added a powerful sword move. Be careful! Ling Moyin, Han Lingxian, and Mu Xingzu all looked nervous. Although they believed in Yi Guchen's strength, the power of Shangguan Jingshan's move was not ordinary after all. Heavenly fire? Yi Guchen's lips curled into a sneer. It was not that he did not have heavenly fire. In an instant, two pitch-black flames rose in Yi Guchen's eyes. On the surface of his body, there was also a ball of pitch-black flames spreading out. Heavenly fire again. This scene caused an uproar in the surroundings again. Yi Guchen's tricks were endless, and everyone was dumbfounded. Three-sword dash, strange flame, strange thunder. What else does this Dugu Wubai not have? Some warriors couldn't help but speak with envy and jealousy. Yi Guchen had all the good stuff. However, they did not know how much effort Yi Guchen had put in to obtain these things. Godly sword lightning manipulation art, heavenly thunder attraction. Yiguchen pointed his sword to the sky and once again drew in the power of thunder from the dark clouds in the sky, colliding with Shangguan Jingshan's sword move. The bone-transforming spiritual fire that sputtered out was also completely isolated by Yiguchen's Nirvana Heart Demon Flame. It was unable to harm Yiguchen at all. At the same time, Yiguchen activated the Nirvana Demonic Heart Flame's ability to attract inner demons. His eyes burned with black flames as he looked at Shangguan Jingshan. Shangguan Jingshan was momentarily stunned as countless inner demon illusions rose in his heart. Yiguchen seized this opportunity and used his so close, yet worlds apart identity. In a flash, he swept in front of Shangguan Jingshan. Edgeless Sword Dao, Void Destruction. Yiguchen's sword vibrated as he used the Edgeless Sword Dao to activate the ultimate move of the Great Void Sword Wave, Void Destruction. Shangguan Jingshan was indeed a top genius. He quickly regained his senses. However, the moment he regained his senses, Yiguchen's sword move had already struck him. Shangguan Jingshan could only hurriedly block with his sword. That Void Sword Wave had the ability to pierce through armor. Therefore, even with the Flaming Demon Shark Tooth Sword and the Flame God armor, Shangguan Jingshan was still injured. He spat out blood as he retreated, his chest and ribs shattered. Damn it! The leader of Sun Moon College's side was the head of the Shangguan family, Shangguan Bo. His face was extremely gloomy. Cousin. Shangguan Yan's expression also changed. She didn't understand why Shangguan Jingshan would be in a daze for a moment. So that's how it is. Shangguan Jingshan adjusted his state and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with his palm. He stared at Yiguchen with a slightly fearful gaze. However, Yiguchen also knew that this ability to attract inner demons required the element of surprise. If Shangguan Jingshan was prepared, it would be very difficult to succeed. However, the effect was good. He used this opportunity to injure Shangguan Jingshan. At this moment, Shangguan Jingshan's expression was solemn. He realized that he couldn't find a way to restrain Yiguchen at all. He even took out the bone-melting spiritual fire. Yiguchen also took out a rare fire of heaven and earth that was of a high level. It seems that I can only use my real trump card. Shangguan Jingshan's expression was slightly ugly. That trump card was a secret killing move that he had specially prepared for the battle of the Sword Master. He didn't want to reveal it now. However, Shangguan Jingshan didn't want to lose to Yiguchen, nor did he want to give up on pursuing Mu Xingzu. Just as Shangguan Jingshan was hesitating in his heart, Yiguchen once again attacked with his sword. Who cares? I can't lose this battle. Shangguan Jingshan gritted his teeth and his expression turned cold. He said coldly, Dugubai, you are indeed capable to make me use my trump card. However, you will also have to pay a price. With that, raging flames surged around Shangguan Jingshan's body. A scorching and terrifying sword concept surged out. Could it be the Fire Sword Principle? No, it's even stronger than the Fire Sword Principle. Yiguchen's expression froze. The Fire Sword Principle was one of the 5 elements sword principles and belonged to the ordinary level. Logically speaking, it shouldn't have such great power. However, the sword principle that Shangguan Jingshan had used at this moment was indeed the Fire Sword Principle. Burning Flame Sword Principle, go! Shangguan Jingshan roared like the fire god descending to the world. Streaks of blazing fire patterns emerged from under his skin. He was extremely powerful like the fire god of the sword. That's Metamorphosis Sword Principle. Shangguan Jingshan's trump card made many elites gasp in shock. The so-called Metamorphosis Sword Principle was a sword principle that was refined, sublimated, and metamorphosed from the foundation of the ordinary sword principle. For example, the Frost Sword Principle of the Solitary Cloud Sword Saint Lung Qianhen was a sword principle that was sublimated from the Ice Sword Principle. At this moment, Shangguan Jingshan's Burning Flame Sword Principle was also a sword principle that was sublimated from the Fire Sword Principle. The fact that Shangguan Jingshan could sublimate with the Fire Sword Principle was enough to show that his attainments in the Fire Sword Principle had reached the peak of perfection. Generally speaking, the Metamorphosis Sword Principle would be stronger than the original Sword Principle. The burning flame sword principle that was sublimated from the fire sword principle was no weaker than the supreme level sword principle. It even belonged to the top of the supreme level sword principle, second only to the creation level sword principle. No one expected Shangguan Jingxin to have such a trump card. Good fellow, Shangguan Jingxin hit it well. Many geniuses sighed. Even Hua Wuxiu, Xuanlian, and Jiang Fengnian raised their eyebrows slightly. Obviously, they did not know about Shangguan Jingxin's trump card. However, Shangguan Bo, the head of the Shangguan family, did not look too good. Now that Shangguan Jingxin had revealed his trump card, he would lose the advantage in the Sword Sun battle. Duguubai, you forced me to reveal my trump card. So you'll lose. Burning Flame Sword Principle, Bursting Flame Break. At this moment, Shangguan Jingxin seemed to be possessed by the fire god. He held the fire demon shark tooth sword and swept it towards Yi Guqin. The fierce sword chi turned into a flame stream and swept out. Yi Guqin's expression turned serious as he felt the pressure. His body shook, and a blood-red sword chi rushed into the sky with a murderous intent. Azura Tribulation, Destruction of Heaven and Earth. Blood-red sword wings spread out behind Yi Guqin's back and collided fiercely with Shangguan Jingxin. The collision of the two ultimate moves caused the sky to collapse and the earth to crack. Chapter 10-12. On one side was the Burning Flame Sword Principle, which had evolved from the Fire Sword Principle. On the other side was the Azura Sword Principle, which had supreme offensive power. These two types of sword principles were considered top-notch among the sword principles of the world. At this moment, when the two collided, it was like Mars colliding with Earth. The surging sword chi turned into continuous waves, shaking the surrounding void. Yi Guqin felt an extremely terrifying burning power surging toward him. The genuine chi on the surface of his body vibrated, and the heart demon flame of nirvana rose, trying to block the burning power. However, the power of the burning flame sword principle was not so easy to block. Even with Yi Guqin's physical body, his skin was slightly charred. Of course, on the other side, Shangguan Jingxin was not in a good condition either. The Azura sword principle, which had extremely strong offensive power, was supported by the 10,000 god tribulation and the power of heaven and earth destruction. In addition, the heaven and earth destruction was a powerful penetrating move that gathered the sword chi at one point. Yi Guqin's sword directly broke the flame sword chi and directly touched Shangguan Jingxin's flame god's armor. Clang! The ear-piercing sound of metal colliding rang out. Shangguan Jingxin felt his chest shake violently, and an extremely strong penetrating force rushed toward him. Spiderweb-like cracks appeared on his flame god's armor. An extremely strong vibrating force also bombarded his body. Shangguan Jingxin's body retreated quickly, and he spat out a mouthful of blood. After this exchange of blows, both of them suffered heavy injuries. Yi Guqin's arms were slightly charred, and there was a flame chi raging in his body. Shangguan Jingxin's internal organs also suffered a great impact, and his chest was heaving up and down. Who blocked it? Many warriors around were stunned when they saw this. Shangguan Jingxin's burning flame sword Dao was so powerful that even Hua Wuxiu and the others did not dare to underestimate it. As for Yi Guqin, after his battle with Ouyang Fengyun, he was still able to stand up to Shangguan Jingxin. This was already surprising enough. Duguubai, I've really underestimated you. Shangguan Jingxin frowned. This was different from what he had imagined. Shangguan Jingxin thought that after he used the burning flame sword Dao, it should be a one-sided crushing. However, the reality was that Yi Guqin had still managed to block his ultimate move. Again! Shangguan Jingxin's eyes seemed to spew out raging flames. He once again brandished the flaming devil shark-tooth sword, augmenting the burning flame sword Dao. Every sword strike seemed to have an endless stream of flames sweeping out, causing the surrounding temperature to rise by quite a bit. Yi Guqin similarly held his sword horizontally and used imminent skyline, clashing with Shangguan Jingxin once again. Shangguan Jingxin was like the god of fire descending to the world, raging flames burning the sky. Yi Guqin was like the emperor of swords, his sword shaking the 9 heavens. The battle between the two prodigies was too much for everyone to take in, and they were all amazed. Hua Wuxiu, who was not far away, had an extremely deep look in his eyes. To be able to fight with Shangguan Jingshan to this extent, it meant that Yi Guqin's strength was not much weaker than his. "Dugubai, is this your true strength?" Hua Wuxiu muttered to himself. He thought that Yi Guqin had already displayed his full strength. But how could he know that Yi Guqin's true trump card had not been completely revealed? As time passed, Shangguan Jingshan's expression grew more and more ugly. He wanted to win to his heart's content and prove himself in front of Mu Xingzu. But now he, a divine-dwelling heaven pride, had fought with Yi Guqin, who was at the spirit bridge of heaven and earth stage, for such a long time. It could be said that he had lost all face. "No, I have to end this quickly," Shangguan Jingshan thought. Immediately, he activated the overbearing flame god force to the limit, and terrifying divine-dwelling stage qi gushed out. "Dugubai, there's no point in delaying. Let's decide the victor with one move." "That's what I was thinking." Yi Guqin's eyes flashed sharply. Although he had the limit of 100,000 feet qi, he was not afraid of the consumption of his qi. But delaying was not beneficial to Yi Guqin. "Burning Flame Sword Wei, Great Flame Demon God." Shangguan Jingshan lifted his sword. Blazing demonic runes emerged from the surface of his body. The blazing sword aura that rose from the Balrog Sharktooth sword also surged in the air. It vaguely transformed into a fiery demon god holding a sword. This was the Burning Flame Sword Wei's sword domain, Great Flame Demon God. At this moment, Shangguan Jingshan seemed to have merged with the Great Flame Demon God. The two raised their swords at the same time, sweeping toward Yi Guqin. As the sword fell, the scarlet sword light hundreds of feet long seemed to cut through the void, bringing with it a powerful wave of energy. The dark clouds in the sky seemed to be split in half by the sword. So strong. Shangguan Jingshan's sword set off an uproar in all directions. Yes, this sword should be able to end it. The patriarch of the Shangguan clan, Shangguan Bo, nodded slightly. "TSK, cousin sword is really strong. Dugubai shouldn't be able to take it, right?" Shangguan Yen sighed. In addition, Sacred Cliff College, Mu Xingzu, and the others were also watching nervously. In the face of Shangguan Jingshan's sword, Yi Guqin stood in the void, the dragon sword behind his back whistling. Azura Blood Sea Level 18. Yi Guqin shouted coldly, the endless sword qi turning into a sea of blood, overturning. Azura Tribulation, Fall of Life. Yi Guqin's sword vibrated as it struck out. The Fall of Life, which was supported by the Azura Sword Wei, collided fiercely with Shangguan Jingshan's sword move. Silence. At the moment of collision, the world fell silent for a moment. The two sword moves collided silently in the void, strangling and annihilating each other. And in the midst of such an extreme collision, Yi Guqin was stunned. Suddenly, a figure, like a shadow, entered the battlefield. A sword pierced towards Yi Guqin's back. No. Mu Xingzu, Ling Moin, Han Lingxian, and the other girls widened their eyes silently, their mouths agape. The other Sacred Cliff College disciples also widened their eyes. No one could have expected. In this extreme collision, someone actually launched a sneak attack. The person who launched the attack was none other than Yin Ju, ranked 6th on the sword ranking. "That's the Yin family's death sword," a warrior cried out. The death sword was an extinct assassination move of the Yin family. When the sword was launched, it was silent. Unfortunately, the target of this sword was Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's sea of consciousness was different from that of ordinary people. It was a chaotic sea of consciousness. The sensitivity of his soul perception was also far superior to that of ordinary people. Therefore, Yi Guqin immediately sensed that a murderous intent had locked onto him. At the same time Yi Guqin launched his sword, his other hand took out the 9-dragon thunder prison, and similarly launched a powerful move. Godly sword lightning controlling art, heavenly thunder summoning. Yi Guqin activated the 9-dragon thunder prison. Above the 9 heavens, black clouds pressed down. A blazing thunderbolt struck down horizontally, entering the Nine-Dragon Thunder Prison, and then colliding with Inju's death sword. Yiguchen, with his own strength, resisted the powerful moves of the 6th and 7th on the sword ranking, two sword Dao prodigies. Break for me! Yiguchen's black hair danced in the wind. He opened his mouth and shouted, like the anger of a divine king. His whole body's true qi exploded, and his sword power was fully released. Holding two swords with both hands, he suddenly shook them, and the violent sword energy swept out like a storm. Shangguan Jingshan and Inju both retreated at the same time. Only Yiguchen held his sword with both hands, standing in the 9 heavens. His eyes were indifferent, like the divine king of the sword, overlooking everyone. The entire sword sovereign city was silent. Chapter 10-13. No one expected a prodigy like Inju to launch a sneak attack. They also did not expect Yiguchen to be able to block Inju's death sword. At this moment, Yiguchen was standing alone in the sky. There were many wounds on his body. Blood was also flowing down his sword-wielding hands. A line of blood was gradually spreading from the corner of his mouth. Everyone was shocked. They knew that although Yiguchen had blocked Inju's sneak attack, he had obviously paid a price. Inju, what are you doing? Shangguan Jingshan was also injured, but he frowned and stared at Inju, who was not far away. To be honest, Shangguan Jingshan did not want Inju to make a move. Every prodigy in the top 10 of the sword roll was arrogant. He did not want to make a move unless he had no other choice. That would be too embarrassing. Shangguan Jingshan, you can't defeat Duguwubai alone. 3 days will pass quickly. Do you want to see him succeed? Inju said coldly. Inju did not care about his reputation. He felt that he had been played by Yiguchen in the sword catacomb. Now, if possible, he wanted to cripple Yiguchen. That was why he launched a sneak attack. But Shangguan Jingshan frowned. But that was the truth. He had used the burning flame sword principle, but he could not defeat Yiguchen. Thinking of this, Shangguan Jingshan fell silent and did not object. Are Shangguan Jingshan and Inju going to team up against Duguwubai? Tisk TSK, this is the first time I've seen two prodigies in the top 10 of the sword roll team up. Do you think Jiang Fengmian will join them? That's hard to say. After all, Duguwubai is their rival in love. Many people looked at Jiang Fengmian. Strength of 1,000 men mode didn't need to avoid group attacks. Therefore, although Inju's sneak attack was despised by some people, they couldn't refute it. Jiang Fengmian stood straight, his blue hair fluttering in the wind. He frowned slightly and stood with his hands behind his back, as if he still had no intention of making a move. Jiang Fengmian's attitude made some sacred Cliff College disciples sigh in relief. If Jiang Fengmian also joined in, then Yiguchen might really be in danger. If any of you want to fight, you can come at me together. I, Duguwubai, will take all of you. Yiguchen held his sword with both hands, his tone extremely cold. Although his injuries were not light, his physical body had a strong recovery ability, so he was able to hold on. Go. Shangguan Jingshan brandished his sword. Anyway, when Inju joined the battle, he had already lost. If he lost, he would have to stay away from Mu Xingzu. But at least, Shangguan Jingshan didn't want Yiguchen to win in the end. Inju's expression was gloomy, and he also brandished his sword. With the two heavenly legends in the top 10 of the sword roll taking the lead, some of the heavenly legends who were originally afraid also became restless. Let's go too. Yin Lin and Yin Su also participated in the 5 academies competition. When they saw Inju make a move, they also couldn't hold back. Yin Lin and Yin Su immediately made a move. After that, some of the heavenly legends from Tensei College, Sun Moon College, and Long River College also made a move. In the blink of an eye, more than 20 heavenly legends, led by Shangguan Jingshan and Inju, rushed toward Yiguchen. Shameless! In the stands, Zimo scolded, her face livid with anger. Especially when she saw that Yin Lin and Yin Su wanted to fish in troubled waters and attack Yiguchen, she was even more furious. The expressions of Mu Xingzhu and the others were also very cold. But because it was one man can hold thousands, they couldn't help Yiguchen. In the face of the siege of a group of heavenly legends, Yiguchen looked calm. A breeze blew, blowing his black hair. At this moment, everyone was watching. Everyone was staring at Yiguchen, wondering how he would solve the crisis. Yiguchen held the 9-dragon thunder prison in one hand and slowly pointed to the sky. In the clouds, endless thunder rumbled. Godly sword thunder control technique, the ultimate move, God annihilation, heavenly punishment. Yiguchen poured his true chi into the 9-dragon thunder prison. The 9-dragon thunder prison suddenly shook, letting out an earth-shattering sword cry. In the clouds of the 9th heaven, rolling thunder poured down like a tide. That tide of thunder was like the end of the world. This move was the ultimate move of the godly sword thunder control technique, God annihilation, heavenly punishment. Brilliant heavenly power, guided by the sword. Strictly speaking, the power of this sword move was no longer the power of Yiguchen's own sword move. It borrowed the power of the heavenly thunder. So the power of this sword move could be imagined. With the guidance of the 9-dragon thunder prison, endless thunder swept toward Shangguan Jingshan and Yinju, as well as the group of heavenly legends. Oh no! Yin Lin was so scared that her face turned pale. But it was too late for her to retreat. Yin Su was the same. His expression changed dramatically. Shangguan Jingshan and the others might be able to resist this powerful move, but the heavenly legends on the heaven and earth spiritual bridge would not be able to withstand it. Burning flame sword way, heavenly flame stream. Shangguan Jingshan hurriedly swung his sword. 9 hell sword. Yinju's expression also changed. He did not expect Yiguchen's move to be so powerful. Rumble. The rolling thunder waves spread out, and many screams could be heard from within. Blood spurted out from the mouths of the heavenly legends. Their bodies were charred black, and they were sent flying like kites with their strings cut. Yin Lin felt her delicate body go numb, and her snow-white skin was charred black. She was sent flying and smashed hard on the ground. She was in a very sorry state, and even her hair was charred by the electricity, emitting a burnt smell. Yin Su and the other heavenly legends were the same. Although this move did not take their lives, it almost took away half of their lives. Except for Shangguan Jingshan and Yinju, the rest of the heavenly legends who rushed up were all sent flying. They all collapsed on the ground, looking very miserable. Even Shangguan Jingshan and Yinju felt their blood boil in their chests, and electricity flowed on the surface of their skin from time to time. Silence. The surrounding area was dead silent. Yiguchen's sword swept through the crowd. Looking at the heavenly legends lying on the ground and wailing in pain, the corners of the eyes of many warriors in the surrounding spectator stands twitched. They had never seen such a scene before. Hua Yuntao, Shangguan Bo, Yin Lingshan, and the other leaders' faces froze. Yiguchen's move of drawing on the heaven's wrath had indeed caught them off guard. Who else? Yiguchen wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with an indifferent expression. Although this God annihilation heavenly punishment was powerful, it also had a certain impact on the body. As soon as his words fell, the entire sword battle square was dead silent. Even Shangguan Jingshan and Yinju frowned and did not act rashly. Will Duguwubai really succeed? Oh my God! If so, then Duguwubai will be the first heavenly legend to successfully pass the one rider against 1,000 men mode. Tisk Hiske. First he passed the 20th level of Mount St. Crossing, then he stepped into the sword catacomb. Is he going to win first place in the 5 academies competition? Many warriors sighed in their hearts. Just when the atmosphere was silent and everyone was looking forward to it. Finally, a slender figure slowly stepped out. Duguwubai, you are indeed very strong, but unfortunately, you met me. As soon as this voice came out, everyone's eyes lit up and endless expectations rose. Hua Wuxiu was finally going to make a move. Chapter 10:14. Hua Wuxiu, the strongest heaven's pride of the Hua family. Third on the sword list. Third heaven of the divine dwelling realm. 7th class heaven's pride, with the sacred light and darkness constitution, and 2 sword das. All kinds of legends were added to his body, causing him to be covered in a layer of dazzling halo. It could be said that Hua Wuxiu was one of the most famous heaven's prides of the Sword Dynasty. Some people thought that his strength was enough to compete for the position of Jiankui. What was even more commendable was that although Hua Wuxiu had the halo of a heaven's pride, he was neither arrogant nor rash. This could be seen from the fact that he did not attack Yi Guqin immediately. Hua Wuxiu was a person who could keep his composure and was very shrewd. It was only now that Yi Guqin had revealed his true strength that Hua Wuxiu decided to attack. He had absolute confidence in dealing with Yi Guqin. Hua Wuxiu, you finally can't hold back anymore? Yi Guqin's gaze stopped on Hua Wuxiu. His position was destined to be on the opposite side of Hua Wuxiu. Duguubai, your strength is indeed beyond everyone's expectations. I didn't expect you to have 3 sword daos, but if you think that you can defeat all the heaven's prides of the 5 great academies of the Sword Dynasty, then you're a little arrogant. Hua Wuxiu put his hands behind his back, his expression calm. I'm not being arrogant, but the truth. Yi Guqin retorted. Well, I'll let you see what the truth is. Hua Wuxiu slowly raised his hand, and a long sword as blazing as the sun fell into his hand. It was the sword of light of the twin swords of light and shadow. They're going to attack? Are they finally going to start the final collision? The entire sword battle square, and even the entire Sword Emperor city, was now the focus of attention. If Yi Guqin wanted to win the final 5 academies tournament, the biggest obstacle was naturally Hua Wuxiu. If Hua Wuxiu could defeat Yi Guqin, the championship would naturally fall to him. This battle could be said to be the most important battle to determine the champion of the 5 academies tournament. Everyone's heart was pounding. Wuxiu, you must destroy that little bastard. Hua Yuntao said coldly in his heart. The rest of the pseudo-saint families were also unwilling to see Yi Guqin win. On the other side, people from Tianxian College and Sacred Cliff College were praying for Yi Guqin. Brother Yi, you must win. Saber 9 mumbled to himself in the sky. If Yi Guqin could win the championship, it would be a great boost to the itinerant cultivators. Even in the future battle for the Sword Sun, it would be of great benefit. In the Sword Dynasty, I haven't really had a hearty battle. Hua Wuxiu, do you have the ability? Yi Guqin held the 9-dragon thunder prison, and the sound of his sword was pleasant to the sky. As you wish. Hua Wuxiu took a step forward, and his sword swept across the sky. His figure seemed to turn into a ray of light, rushing straight to the sky, and his sword was pointed at Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's arm shook, and the sound of his sword was like the roar of a dragon, shaking the sky. Rumble. Dark clouds rolled in the sky, and thunder shook the world. Torrential rain fell from the sky. It was as if they were witnessing the ultimate duel between the 2 swordsmen. The 2 figures collided directly, and a loud clang sounded, as if hundreds of millions of divine weapons were clashing. The entire Sword Emperor city was enveloped by this extremely loud collision. Everyone could hear the ear-shattering trembling sound in their ears. Clang, clang, clang. Sword shadows were everywhere, and sword chi soared into the sky. The 2 people instantly clashed in the sky. The sword edge cut through the rain, as if splitting the curtain of rain in half. Sword of light, daybreak. Hua Wuxiu's sword swept out. The blazing sword light was like the light of daybreak, and with incomparably sharp sword chi, it pierced towards Yi Guqin's chest. Divine sword lightning controlling art, myriad lightning transformations. Yi Guqin's sword vibrated, and 9-colored lightning burst out from the sword, as if it had turned into thousands of lightning snakes, and swept out. Rumble. Lightning illuminated the sky, and sword light illuminated the world. Hua Wuxiu's body shook, and the aura of the 3rd layer of the divine dwelling completely erupted. Powerful chi poured into the sword of light, and he slashed down at Yi Guqin. Sword of light, sunset. The mighty chi seemed to have turned into a magnificent sunset, but it also contained a fatal danger. Yi Guqin's eyes flashed, and he once again displayed the ultimate killing move of the divine sword lightning controlling art, divine thunder heaven summoning. The lightning in the sky fused with 9-colored lightning, and it swept out with a loud rumble. Boom! In this extreme collision, Yiguchen's figure was blasted back hundreds of feet, and a sword wound so deep that bone could be seen appeared on his shoulder. Dugubai is injured, some people exclaimed. Dugubai is at a disadvantage because of his cultivation level, and coupled with the previous consumption, it's normal that he can't beat Hua Wuxiu, some experts analyzed. Indeed, in everyone's view, Yiguchen's ability to compete with the heaven prides of the divine dwelling stage with Tiandi Lingxiao's strength was already amazing enough. But against Hua Wuxiu, who was at the third layer of the divine dwelling stage, it was still a little difficult. The advantage in cultivation level, coupled with Yiguchen's previous consumption, led to the current situation. Not good. On the Sacred Cliff College side, Bei Xian Elder and the others had ugly expressions. Although they knew that Yiguchen's chances of successfully passing the one-man against 1,000 men challenge were very slim, but there was still a glimmer of hope in their hearts, and they hoped that a miracle would happen. But it seemed that the situation was not good for Yiguchen. Master! Mu Xingzu's heart was also in her mouth. But unlike the others, Mu Xingzu had absolute faith in Yiguchen. After all, her master was someone who had fought a bloody battle with Di Haotian. Although Hua Wuxiu was not weak, there was still a big gap between him and Di Haotian. Yiguchen was not even afraid of Di Haotian, so how could he be afraid of Hua Wuxiu? Come on, master. Mu Xingzu opened her small mouth and shouted desperately. So what if you shout? Against Hua Wuxiu, Dugubai won't be able to turn the tables. Some of Yiguchen's enemies sneered. Boom, boom, boom. The collision in the sky continued. Yiguchen's figure was knocked back again, and blood flowed out of his mouth. On the other hand, Hua Wuxiu was much calmer. Dugubai, is this your strength? Hua Wuxiu's face was calm, and there was a trace of disappointment. Hearing this, many Sacred Cliff College disciples clenched their fists. In their view, if Yiguchen had not fought with Shangguan Jingshan and the others, he would not have been suppressed. Hua Wuxiu, is this your strength? Yiguchen's face did not show the slightest frustration. Instead, his eyes were deep. Hua Wuxiu felt that something was wrong. But a moment later, Hua Wuxiu frowned slightly. Are you measuring my strength? Hua Wuxiu said coldly. What do you think? Yiguchen's lips curved into a sneer. Indeed, from an outsider's point of view, Yiguchen was in a state of being suppressed. But his real intention was to use this to measure Hua Wuxiu's true strength, as well as the increase in combat power brought about by his third layer of the divine dwelling realm. And now, Yiguchen had a better understanding of Hua Wuxiu's strength. So next. Hua Wuxiu, the show has just begun. Yiguchen suddenly made a hand seal. A terrifying devouring force was released from his body. In an instant, the sky changed color. Yiguchen seemed to have turned into the eye of the storm, and the surrounding spiritual qi was all absorbed by him. The heaven-devouring secret technique, erupt. Chapter 10:15. The sky-devouring secret art, as one of the top 10 ancient secret arts, had always been Yiguchen's trump card. It was also his best method to make up for his lack of cultivation level. Although Yiguchen had not completely mastered the sky-devouring secret art, he had at least reached the first level. The first level could ignore the bottleneck of one's cultivation level and allow Yiguchen's power to soar by 3 cultivation levels. At this moment, Yiguchen displayed the sky-devouring secret art, as if he had become the center of the world. An endless amount of spiritual energy was absorbed by it. What kind of secret art is that? I don't know. Dugubai still has such a method? All the cultivators present were shocked by Yiguchen's method. Hua Wuxiu also revealed a look of surprise, and then his face darkened. In the perception of everyone present, Yiguchen's cultivation level soared. 8th level of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. 9th level of the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. Divine Dwelling Stage. Boom. When Yiguchen's aura broke through to the Divine Dwelling Stage, the surrounding space rippled. Yiguchen held the 9-dragon thunder prison in his hand, his black hair fluttering in the wind. He was like a divine king that had undergone nirvana, and his pressure was astonishing. With the power of the sky-devouring secret art, Yi Guqin's cultivation soared to the divine dwelling stage. Although at this moment, he had not formed a divine dwelling in his dantian. But in terms of the density of his qi and cultivation alone, he was comparable to a divine dwelling expert. How is this possible? What kind of secret art can make Dugawubai's strength break through to the divine dwelling stage? Many people were stunned. Shangguan Jingshan, Ouyang Fengyun, Yin Zhu, and the others trembled. They did not expect Yi Guqin to have such a trump card. If he had used it just now, Shangguan Jingshan and the others might not have been suppressed, but at least they wouldn't have had any advantage. So he was holding back when he was fighting me. Shangguan Jingshan gritted his teeth, feeling a sense of humiliation and frustration in his heart. In Yi Guqin's eyes, Shangguan Jingshan was not qualified enough for him to go all out. Only an opponent like Hua Wuxiu deserved to go all out. Yi Guqin's aura erupted like a volcano. A power that he had never felt before flowed through his body. Is this the power of the divine dwelling stage? Yi Guqin muttered. He finally understood why Heaven and Earth Bridge Heaven Prides were no match for divine dwelling Heaven Prides. The difference in the quality and density of his Jinqi was simply too great. If Yi Guqin hadn't relied on his perfect physical body, the limit of his sea of qi and other means, he wouldn't have been able to fight against an expert of the divine dwelling stage. But now, after using the sky-devouring secret technique, the gap between Yi Guqin and Hua Wuxiu had shrunk a lot. Hua Wuxiu, let's fight again. Yi Guqin took a step forward, and his figure flashed directly in front of Hua Wuxiu as if he had teleported. The same sword swept out, but the power was more than twice as strong as before. So you still have such a trump card? Hua Wuxiu's expression also turned a little serious. He thought that Yi Guqin had already used all his trump cards in the battle with Shangguan Jingshan and the others. Who would have thought that Yi Guqin was still holding back? But Hua Wuxiu was a top heaven pride after all, and he wouldn't be so easily swayed. He drew his sword again and fought with Yi Guqin. In this collision, Yi Guqin's disadvantage was obviously much less. Although there was still a gap of 3 small realms between him and Hua Wuxiu, with the help of his perfect physical body, the limit of his sea of qi and other means, he wasn't much weaker than Hua Wuxiu. Hateful. On the Hua family's side, Hua Yuntao's eyes were gloomy. He thought that Hua Wuxiu would be able to achieve a decisive victory, but who would have thought there would be such an unforeseen event? On the Sacred Cliff College's side, many disciples breathed a sigh of relief. But at the moment, Hua Wuxiu still had a slight advantage. In everyone's view, Yi Guqin's situation wasn't optimistic. Dugawubai, you've really hidden your strength well, but it's time to end it, Hua Wuxiu said indifferently. He didn't want to drag it out with Yi Guqin for too long, and he wanted to achieve a crushing victory. Only in this way could Hua Wuxiu shatter the halo of a saint. Bright sword technique, unhindered. Hua Wuxiu stabbed out with his sword, and as the sword qi gushed out, it seemed to turn into an illusory chessboard in the void. Hua Wuxiu has finally begun to show his true strength. Seeing this scene, many warriors couldn't help but exclaim. Hua Wuxiu's Go Dao was as famous as his sword Dao. He had the sacred body of light and darkness, and Go was also a black and white game, so the two were compatible. Therefore, Hua Wuxiu liked to play Go since he was young, and he even integrated Go Dao into sword Dao. This bright sword technique was the perfect fusion of Go Dao and sword Dao. In an instant, Yi Guqin felt that the surrounding void seemed to be sealed by the unhindered sword qi. The sky is divided into yin and yang, and Go is divided into black and white. Unhindered and unhindered, only I am unparalleled. As Hua Wuxiu's sword vibrated, black and white chess pieces appeared in the void and slashed at Yi Guqin. Interesting. Not only was there no fear in Yi Guqin's eyes, but there was also excitement. Such a strange sword technique was indeed rare. Star-breaking sword of absolute destruction. Yi Guqin pointed his sword and collided with the sword qi of the chess pieces. However, the chess pieces in the surrounding void moved continuously, draining Yi Guqin's spiritual qi. Dugawubai, you don't have to waste your energy. My bright sword technique has integrated Go Dao, and is not just a sword technique. Hua Wuxiu's lips curled into a faint smile. He was extremely confident in his Go Dao. Is that so? Yi Guchen's eyes flashed. It wasn't that he didn't know how to play Go. In his previous life, when he was the sword demon, he sat cross-legged on a lonely peak for more than 10 years. Other than talking to the divine condor, he often played Go with himself. Although Yi Guchen didn't specialize in Go Dao, it didn't mean that he didn't know how to play. Thinking of this, Yi Guchen's chaotic sea of consciousness turned, and his mind was shaken. In an instant his eyes shone. Dragon sword come. Yi Guchen's soul power spread out and summoned the dragon sword in the void. The dragon sword roared and swooped down. The true dragon formed by thousands of ancient swords broke through the Go Dao in the void. Bright sword technique Tanyuan. Hua Wuxiu snorted coldly and changed his sword momentum. He pointed his sword and fixed Tianyuan. Tianyuan was the center of the Go Dao, and a sword could decide the whole game. This sword was aimed directly at Yi Guchen. Sword of absolute destruction. Yi Guchen raised his sword, and a blazing sword light soared into the sky and collided with Hua Wuxiu's sword of Tianyuan. The void exploded, and endless waves of sword qi swept through the surrounding space. Bright sword technique, dragon slaying. Hua Wuxiu activated his vigorous spiritual qi, and a 100-meter-long black and white sword qi appeared in the void, and a fierce sword qi pressure spread out. In the Go Dao, there was a saying about dragon slaying. At this moment, Hua Wuxiu integrated this move into his sword Dao. The 100-meter-long black and white sword light swept toward Yi Guchen's dragon sword. Can you kill this dragon of mine? Yi Guchen shouted coldly, and his spiritual qi also erupted. He performed the sword of absolute destruction and the sword of absolute destruction. Third ultimate holy sword, annihilation of heaven and earth. Yi Guchen's sword cut through the air, and it was as if heaven and earth were turned upside down, and the universe was destroyed. The two ultimate moves collided, and the waves shook the world. Chapter 1016. Heaven and Earth Annihilation was the strongest move of the three ultimate holy swords, second only to the combination of the three moves. Hua Wuxiu's dragon-slaying sword was also the strongest move of the bright sword technique. Between the two, strong moves collided like meteors colliding and dragons colliding. Endless ripples of sword qi burst out, causing the surrounding space to tremble endlessly. After the collision, both of them were shaken back. Yi Guchen's chest tightened, and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth again. Hua Wuxiu was ranked third on the sword ranking, and his strength was indeed not weak. Even with Yi Guchen's physical body, he was still injured in the collision. On the other side, Hua Wuxiu seemed to be uninjured, but the web between his thumb and index finger where he held the sword was split open, and blood dripped down. However, compared to Yi Guchen, he was still slightly better. Looking at the situation, the Hua family and other pseudo-saint families smiled. Obviously, they thought that it was only a matter of time before Yi Guchen's defeat. Dugawubai, you are just a chess piece on my chessboard. Hua Wuxiu looked calm. He took a step forward and light flashed around him. His whole body seemed to have transformed into endless light shadows, and he flashed toward Yi Guchen. It's Hua Wuxiu's royal-level body movement, light and shadow follower. Many warriors widened their eyes. Royal-level body movement was extremely rare, even rarer than swordsmanship martial arts. Hua Wuxiu used light and shadow follower, and his body was extremely fast, like a beam of light. Not only that, but countless illusions also appeared around his body. Every shadow was no different from Hua Wuxiu, and even their auras were exactly the same. Obviously, they had a strong confusing effect. Bright sword technique yin and yang. Hua Wuxiu used bright sword technique again while using his body movement. In the face of Hua Wuxiu's aggressive attack, Yi Guchen's chaotic sea of consciousness operated in his mind. His powerful spiritual perceptions spread out, trying to distinguish between the real body and the phantom. But to Yi Guchen's surprise, each of Hua Wuxiu's phantoms looked no different from the real thing. If it could be seen through so easily, then it would be a shame for its emperor-class movement technique. Hua Wuxiu smiled faintly. Then, the sound of swords clashing could be heard. Yi Guqin continued to wield his sword to block Hua Wuxiu's attacks. It's over. Dugawubai is at a complete disadvantage now. Some of the loose cultivators revealed dejected looks. At this moment, Yi Guqin used wave-like subtle steps. His figure was like a willow in the wind, or like duckweed floating in the water. At the same time, a surge of sword concept erupted from within his body. Gravity sword domain, go. Yi Guqin used the sword domain of the edgeless sword principle. In the void, the primordial sacred mountain appeared, and a heavy pressure spread out to the surrounding void. Even Hua Wuxiu was affected, and his movement technique slowed down. 10,000 waves of the void. Yi Guqin used the ultimate move of the Great Void Sword Wave again. The sword wave could ignore most defenses. Hua Wuxiu was caught off guard, and his figure was knocked back. The surrounding phantoms disappeared in an instant. The sudden reversal of the battle situation was also unexpected to everyone. Even Hua Yuntao's expression changed slightly. Sword principle domain? Hua Wuxiu murmured. His eyes seemed to be emitting endless light. Vigorous sword qi surged out of his body and immediately turned into a radiant domain. Hua Wuxiu stood in the middle, like a golden divine king, releasing endless light. This was Komio Kendo's sword domain, the radiant sword domain. He finally used the sword principle domain. Hua Wuxiu has the light and darkness sacred body. The radiant sword domain he released is even stronger than Hua Xingjia's. Some of the Hua family disciples clenched their fists and said, Hua Xingjia also had the Komio Kendo, and he had used it before. But now, the radiant sword domain that Hua Wuxiu released was several times stronger than Hua Xingjia's. Half the sky seemed to be illuminated by the golden light. I am the light. Hua Wuxiu raised his sword. In the radiant sword domain, light swords condensed one after another. In the end, there were thousands of light swords surrounding him. Suppress. As Hua Wuxiu finished speaking, the light swords rushed toward Yi Guqin. Godly sword lightning manipulation art, divine annihilation heavenly punishment. In the face of Hua Wuxiu's powerful move, Yi Guqin would not underestimate it. He directly used the godly sword lightning manipulation art's ultimate move. The sword pointed to the sky, and endless thunder roared, turning into a thunder tide that spread down. Rumble. The destructive thunder tide collided with the endless light swords, and a violent roar burst forth. Radiant sword domain, 10,000 sword salvation. Hua Wuxiu used his powerful move again. He raised his hand, and the radiant sword domain condensed into 10,000 golden light swords again, and continued to rush toward Yi Guqin. Yi Guqin's eyes were suddenly swallowed by the color of blood, and turned into the eyes of Azura. Endless bloody and murderous aura surged out of Yi Guqin's body. He seemed to have turned into a demon in the sword, killing the sky with his blood. Azura blood C18 layers, suppress. Yi Guqin and Hua Wuxiu confronted each other head-on, unwilling to retreat at all. Sword qi turned into a blood tide, and the 18 layers of blood prison were like bloody meteors, smashing into Hua Wuxiu's radiant sword domain. Rumble. The two sword Dao domains collided, and the rain in the sky seemed to be scattered. Hua Wuxiu's Komio Kendo was ordinary, but it was not weaker than the exceptional sword Dao. With the support of the sacred light and darkness constitution, Hua Wuxiu's light and darkness sword Dao were even stronger than ordinary exceptional sword Dao. However, Yi Guqin's Azura sword Dao was also an exceptional sword Dao, and it was an existence that focused on killing. Its lethality was needless to say. In such a violent collision, both of them spat out blood. Especially Hua Wuxiu, who had been incomparably calm before, but now there was blood flowing from the corner of his mouth. Wuxiu. Hua Yuntao and the other members of the Hua family all looked solemn. It was rare for them to see Hua Wuxiu injured, let alone bleeding. In their view, the number of the younger generation of the Sword Dynasty who were qualified to injure Hua Wuxiu could be counted on one hand. Hua Wuxiu raised his hand and wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth. Looking at the bloodstains on his palm, Hua Wuxiu's expression slowly sank. What he needed was to defeat Yi Guqin in front of everyone in the 5 Academies tournament. Not to be caught in a difficult battle like this. Yi Guqin, you have angered me. Hua Wuxiu's eyes were cold. He had always been calm, but now he was really infuriated by Yi Guqin. Hua Wuxiu, whatever means you have, just use them. Yi Guqin was also injured, and there was a little blood on his chin. Well, then I'll let you see the real power of the divine light and darkness body, a 7th-class genius talent. Hua Wuxiu's tone was cold. On the surface of his body, streaks of golden runes spread out, carrying with them endless golden runes. Hua Wuxiu's long hair was scattered, and every strand seemed to have turned golden. Hua Wuxiu's whole person seemed to have incarnated into the god of light, and his aura was extremely strong. Divine light and darkness body, light form. Hua Wuxiu lashed out with his sword again. The reddish-gold sword radiance seemed to cut through the void as it rushed towards Yi Guqin. What a strong power! Yi Guqin's expression suddenly froze. He blocked in front of him with the 9-dragon thunder prison, and with a loud bang, Yi Guqin's figure was fiercely knocked back. Chapter 1017. Yi Guqin had previously estimated Hua Wuxiu's strength. But now, Hua Wuxiu's strength was far beyond Yi Guqin's expectations, so he was forced to retreat. When they saw Hua Wuxiu, with his golden hair fluttering in the wind and his body branded with golden runes, everyone was shocked. The gazes of all 500,000 martial artists were fixed on him. There was an indescribable shock on their faces. Is this Hua Wuxiu's divine ability, the divine body of light and darkness? This is the first time I've seen it. The divine ability of a 7th-grade genius is indeed powerful. Many martial artists stared at Hua Wuxiu without blinking. Talent was innate, and ordinary people could only envy it. I heard that Hua Wuxiu's divine body of light and darkness allows him to switch between the light form and the dark form, each with different emphasis. Some martial artists whispered to each other. I heard that Hua Wuxiu's divine body of light is supreme in terms of strength. He is unparalleled in terms of strength. Duguwubai is really in danger now. Many people sighed. Now that Hua Wuxiu had even used his divine ability, the scales of victory were undoubtedly tilted to his side. Huh? Killing a chicken with a sledgehammer. Hua Yuntao sneered and shook his head. Obviously, he thought that using the divine body of light and darkness to defeat Yi Guqin was a waste of talent. I knew it. How could Duguwubai be a match for Brother Hua? On the other side, Yushuang Yan, who had been seriously injured by Yi Guqin, looked at the golden figure in the sky with great admiration. As for Sacred Cliff College, the atmosphere was very gloomy. Hua Wuxiu's innate mystique brought about an immense amount of pressure. At this moment, even Elder Beixian and the others couldn't help but feel nervous. Facing Hua Wuxiu, who had taken on the form of light, Yi Guqin frowned slightly. He was also a 7th-rank prodigy and also had a special ability. He was not weaker than Hua Wuxiu. However, the Xiantian sword embryo was still a little too conspicuous. If he were to bring it out now, it would inevitably attract the attention of some people. Therefore, Yi Guqin did not intend to use his innate sword embryo. However, even if Yi Guqin couldn't use his innate sword embryo, he still had a way to deal with it. Duguwubai, it's over. Hua Wuxiu's eyes seemed to have turned golden as well. He held the sword of light in his hand and swept it towards Yi Guqin like a divine king. Yi Guqin also wielded his sword and went up to fight with Hua Wuxiu. With a loud clang, Yi Guqin's figure was knocked back again. Hua Wuxiu's current power was unstoppable. He was really like a primordial king. Is this the divine light and darkness constitution? It's really amazing. Yi Guqin thought to himself. The divine light and darkness constitution could allow Hua Wuxiu to switch between light and darkness. The light form was the supreme form of power. Then what was the darkness form? However, facing Hua Wuxiu's powerful attack, Yi Guqin could not stand still. Ancient God technique. Yi Guqin shouted coldly in his mind. 2 star imprints appeared between his eyebrows. Ancient God light patterns appeared under Yi Guqin's skin. his entire body grew to 9 feet tall, and his physical strength instantly increased by 8 times. Yi Guqin also transformed into his ancient god form. Hua Wuxiu again. Yi Guqin's current aura was just as strong. He held his sword and clashed with Hua Wuxiu again. Immediately, Hua Wuxiu felt a strong force coming from the tip of the sword. At this moment, Yi Guqin's skyrocketing power even overpowered his light form. How is this possible? Hua Wuxiu's expression finally changed. Not only him, but all the cultivators present were also dumbfounded. They did not expect that Yi Guqin still had a trump card that could compete with Hua Wuxiu's light form. On the Hua family's side, the atmosphere was even more deathly silent. Hua Yuntao's face was twitching. Every time he thought that Hua Wuxiu could win, Yi Guqin would use another trump card. Dugubai, how much more are you hiding? Even Hua Wuxiu could no longer keep calm. He thought that he had seen through Yi Guqin, but he realized that Yi Guqin could always surprise him. Radiance Sword Realm, Holy Light Sword. The light sword in Hua Wuxiu's hand rose into the air. Endless divine light gathered around it, and a golden giant sword that was 100 feet long appeared. Hua Wuxiu used his light form to activate the Radiance Sword Realm and Holy Light Sword. One could imagine the power of the superposition. The entire void seemed to be filled with divine light. The sword energy was like a tidal wave. Dugubai, can you take this sword? Hua Wuxiu raised one hand and grabbed at the void. The Holy Light Sword was grabbed by Hua Wuxiu and swept towards Yi Guqin. The sky shook as the sword swept out. The thick layers of clouds were shattered. This was Hua Wuxiu's strongest move. Its power made all the heaven prides tremble in fear. They knew that they could not take Hua Wuxiu's move. Even Kenpo and the other sword sons of the unaffiliated cultivator camp were shocked by the power of this sword. Hua Wuxiu definitely has the strength to compete for the Jiankui. Kenpo's eyes were solemn. Hundreds of thousands of gazes gathered on the scene. Would Yi Guqin be able to withstand this sword? Yi Guqin's expression was calm in the face of Hua Wuxiu's ultimate move. The 100,000 feet Qi in his body was activated to the limit. True Qi comparable to the divine dwelling stage gushed out and poured into the 9-dragon thunder prison. Starbreaker Sword. Yi Guqin's sword vibrated, and sword Qi flowed like a river of stars. How can this move block Hua Wuxiu's killing move? Seeing Yi Guqin's action, many warriors shook their heads. But it was not over. Yi Guqin's sword power changed again, and a crescent-shaped sword light emerged again. 2 swords combined? He has used this move before, and its power should not be comparable to Hua Wuxiu's, a sovereign muttered to himself. But this was not the end. Yi Guqin's expression hardened, and sword Qi gushed out again. A blazing sword light appeared once again. The Qianyang sword of extinction was displayed. Could it be? Just as Yi Guqin unleashed all 3 moves, Han Lingxian's delicate body shook from the Divine Cliff Academy's side. Her eyes were filled with extreme disbelief as she looked at Yi Guqin. She also cultivated the 3 ultimate holy swords, so she naturally knew what move Yi Guqin was using. Could it be the 3 ultimate holy swords combined? Han Lingxian covered her red lips, and she was shocked. Combining 2 swords of the 3 ultimate holy swords was already very difficult. As for combining 3 swords, it was even more difficult. Even if Han Lingxian cultivated every day, she could only display the starry sun-flowing fire, and she could not even display the universal extermination. But Yi Guqin was going to display the 3 ultimate holy swords combined. How could Han Lingxian not be shocked? In the sky, Yi Guqin displayed the 3 ultimate holy swords at the same time, and the 3 sword lights froze in the void. Yi Guqin's expression was cold, and his breath condensed as he spoke slowly. Starbreaker, Earth Moon, Qianyang. 3 ultimate holy swords, 3 ultimate holy swords combined. Moon falling star sinking vast yang break. Yi Guqin pointed his sword at the sky, and the 3 sword lights combined into one, turning into an extremely sharp sword light. This was the 3 ultimate holy swords combined, the ultimate move. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.